Lightning cuts through the sky, illuminating the streets flooded with rain. And through the noise of the storm, someone asked two questions: whether the video had been released yet, and whether the Supernatural Association had reacted to it in any way. And since the association hasn't reacted in any way, it means they don't want to reveal the source of the supernatural power. As it turned out, these questions were asked by one of the criminals who attacked the students, holding them hostage. The children were in a panic, but they reassured themselves that the association shouldn't care, so they had to be saved. They just had to wait a little. And then one of the students decided to fight back against the criminals, to at least try to stop them. But just as the daredevil wanted to do something, Lin Luan stopped him, telling the teenager not to act like a hero and to control himself because he couldn't do anything against the bandits alone. However, the guy was not alone, because the others were ready to help him, because everyone wanted to save themselves, and there were only 4 criminals, so the students decided to join forces. But the bandits turned out to be not so simple, so they quickly noticed that something was being prepared against them, and ordered the teenagers to behave more calmly. And one of them had the power to increase in size, which looked very frightening. The teenagers did not expect such a turn of events, so suddenly all their confidence in victory evaporated in an instant. Even though the criminal's accomplices with the power of growth told him not to go too far with the children, he still hit one of the boys with all his cruelty. The blow was so strong that the unfortunate student's blood flew in all directions. This action frightened all the students so much that they began to panic and run away in all directions without even thinking. Lin Luan then realized that this was the perfect moment to save himself, and shouted about it to the guy Yahello, whom he had stopped before. But the daredevil once again decided to act like a hero, thinking not about himself, but about others. After all, the student understood that not everyone would be able to escape from the giant, so he wanted to help as many people as possible. Then Luan remembered a situation from his childhood, when he and 5 of his friends swam to the middle of the lake. But he returned alone, and then many scolded him for not helping the others. In the end, the remaining children were saved by others, but many still blamed the boy for the fact that if his friends had died, their deaths would have been on his conscience. Lin himself did not understand what he was guilty of, because he would not have been able to help the others in any way. But this way, he could at least save himself. Therefore, using the same logic, Luan told Hao that they had to leave in order to save themselves first. The students realized that the safest course of action was to duck, walk where there was no light, and head for the door through which they could escape. But then the guys noticed a figure that was on the ladder, but it was not clear who exactly it was because of the darkness. The stranger concluded that the turmoil was the best time to act. After these words, the unknown person jumped out from cover and struck one of the criminals, doing everything so quickly that he did not even encounter resistance. It turned out that the stranger's name was Ji Feng, and he was one of the most popular newly minted heroes with supernatural powers from the association. And if he was here, it meant that the others were saved. The man waited for the best moment, and as soon as it arrived, the hero took advantage of it and quickly dealt with the villains. But Feng only defeated 3 of the 4 criminals because the last one hid in the crowd of fleeing students, but the hero himself did not know about it. Lin tried to shout to the man, but due to the commotion he couldn't be heard, so the guy couldn't warn the hero and decided to save himself, hoping that Feng would fix everything himself. The hero from the association himself had already reported by phone that he had dealt with everything, and almost all the students had already run out into the street, so he thought everything was fine. But Feng relaxed too soon, because while he was distracted, a 4th criminal attacked him from behind, whose existence the hero did not even suspect, so he was not prepared for this attack. And then, unexpectedly, the man was saved by a boy who kept telling himself that he needed to save himself first, but ended up jumping under the villain's attack to save another person. Lin again remembered that moment from his childhood, because it was then that the boy wanted to become a hero, when he saved the other children thanks to the fact that he swam quickly and was able to loudly call for help. In this situation, the student truly acted like a true hero, because by sacrificing himself, he saved the man. The criminal thought that Ji Feng was a vile person, because he hid in the crowd in order to attack later, and the villain was glad that he was able to escape in time. Then the villain began to think about how he could punish the boy for preventing the killing of a popular hero, who would no longer be alive if not for Luan's actions. Then Ji Feng ordered the criminal to release the student, but he would agree to this only if the hero threw away his sword so that everything would be fair. The villain ridiculed the man who is the association's hero, but it is he who is saved, and not the other way around. In the end, the hero had to make this deal so that the criminal would stop torturing the teenager, so he had to throw away his sword. In the criminal's opinion, Feng was no match for him without a sword, so he began to rejoice, thinking that he could now win this battle. However, while the villain was rejoicing over his yet-to-be-achieved victory, the hero was able to grab the sword again and deal the enemy a blow he did not expect. So Feng managed to cut off the criminal's hand, which was holding the guy, who simply fell to the ground, hitting himself hard. The hero, in turn, simply apologized to the student, explaining to him that the situation was simply critical, so he had to act quickly, otherwise someone else could get hurt. Luan became a hero who saved everyone, but unfortunately, no one could save the teenager himself, who simply remained lying on the ground. In the end, Feng only told the boy that the blow was fast, so Lin should not have felt anything, so he would die without pain. Feng's savior didn't understand how the hero could kill him so without hesitation, because the man could have come up with something to save the teenager, but Ji simply didn't want to come to the rescue. And then Lin saw a sign, like in a game, which said that the guy had received a chance to be resurrected, and then a question about whether he wanted to take advantage of this chance. While saving the hero, Luan himself died, and now his funeral was taking place, which took place on a cloudy, rainy day. Meanwhile, Feng was receiving thanks for his heroic rescue of more than 200 people yesterday at 8 o'clock in the evening at Wencheng Middle School, where attackers had taken all of its students hostage. The news said that Ji Feng had once again proven that their city's security could be relied upon. And while Feng listened to the enthusiastic cries directed at him, and Lin Luan's mother cried at his funeral, he himself chose resurrection in this mysterious tablet. The sign showed that the regeneration was complete, and then a question appeared about whether to accept the reward, which was the use of an ability called capture. Lin decided that this ability wouldn't make things any worse for him, continuing to regenerate with the thought that he had to teach Ji Feng a lesson. That's why Luan decided to accept this ability, wanting to take revenge on the hero for leaving the guy to die without even trying to save him. It turned out that as soon as he agreed to a second attempt at life, he was returned to the moment he died. So he immediately found the hero and attacked him from behind. Feng was talking on the phone at the time, reporting the situation, so he didn't expect that anyone would attack him. That's why the man was unable to react when Luan bit him on the shoulder so hard that blood gushed out. With the help of the blood that was shed because of Lin Luan, the boy was able to analyze the hero's abilities, learning that among them were Shadow Step, Snake Execution, Crow Tenacity, and Breathing Method. And this analysis was not done without reason, because a surviving student can absorb one of the provided abilities. When the hero saw that the student was still alive, Feng began to strike the boy, asking why he had not died yet. Meanwhile, Luan was thinking about which of the available abilities he should choose, and eventually settled on the shadow approach. Thanks to this power, the teenager was able to dodge the blow that the hero wanted to inflict on him. But the problem was that Lin had no idea how to use and control this ability. Feng noticed the power the boy was using and then told him that it was quite ordinary, so the hero wouldn't be surprised by it, because he didn't know that this ability was stolen from him. In the end, both young people took advantage of this ability, but only one of them knew how to use it. Of course, the man's advantage was obvious, so he was already ready to deal a fatal blow to the student whom he was supposed to save. But this was not destined to happen, because after the bite, the hero's DNA began to change, so that suddenly he simply froze in place. And then Feng simply laid down his sword, without making the blow with which he so wanted to take the life of the one who saved him. The guy himself did not understand what had just happened, because he was already sure that he would soon die again. Then, before Luan's eyes, it appeared that the subjugation was complete, and he received a new slave. And after that, the hero called him Master. The boy learned that his abilities include the ability to analyze an opponent's abilities and, by biting them, absorb one of them. The student also introduces a systemic factor into the opponent's body, thereby rewriting their genetic code, forcing them to obey. Luan was surprised that the hero had just wanted to kill him, and now he was obeying. And after that, Feng apologized to the guy, calling him Master, and Lin, in turn, asked him not to call him that. After this, the guy began to scold the man for attacking so recklessly, and because of this, casualties were inevitable, to which the hero replied that sacrificing several civilians to stop the villains is a normal practice. Then, the student began to become disillusioned with the association, because one of the most popular characters was telling him things that didn't seem right, which meant that the others were most likely the same. Lin Luan was so surprised by this whole situation that he still didn't believe that Feng was under his control, so he decided to test it by ordering the man to kill himself. The hero answered without hesitation that he was obeying, ready to do whatever the student ordered him to do. And Feng was really ready to do this, because he even took out his sword for this, then brought it to his neck. But at the last moment, when the hero was already on the verge of death, Lin ordered him to stop, because he initially did not expect that his words would be listened to. Luan decided to leave it for now while he filmed it on his phone. Feng followed all the students' orders, and the student, in turn, decided to embarrass the man by forcing him to take funny photos. The student found it very funny, and he even imagined how he would show this to the girls he knew, because they would go crazy over it. But then Luan's fun was interrupted by a girl who quietly approached the teenager who was bullying the hero. And it so happened that this heroine came at the wrong time, because she saw something that would be very difficult to explain. Then Lin ordered the man to get dressed quickly, while he himself looked at the girl, who turned out to be a stranger to him, so he began to guess that she was also someone from the association. The heroine came for the hero, but told the boy that it was time for him to leave too, since his parents were probably already terribly worried. Finally, Luan gave his slave the order that the man should tell about everything that happened today at a press conference tomorrow. Feng replied that he was listening, and this short dialogue attracted the attention of the woman, who was surprised by what she had just heard. After this, the teenager ran to his mother and friend, who were very worried about the suddenly missing boy. Everyone immediately began to worry about the student's condition, but he began to calm them down by saying that the boy was feeling great. The building of the Association of Supernatural Power was simply colossal in size, cutting through the sky. It was to this building that Ji Feng and the stranger who had come to pick him up went. The girl stopped the hero, who was about to leave, and then asked if he had a minute. As it turned out, it was 10 minutes before the press conference, so the stranger didn't have much time to talk to the man. The question that the heroine so wanted to ask was whether the boy with whom the man was caught was his fan, because the stranger was very curious about this. And then the girl asked if Feng had written down the tags he was going to highlight, asking him to take a look at them. Luan, meanwhile, realized that he could only activate the ability for points, of which he had 50 when he was revived, but currently had 0, and he had no idea what to do to get them. But in the end, the guy decided that now was not the best time for him to think about it, because he was very tired, and he just wanted the lessons to end as quickly as possible. Due to the loss of strength after the events that had happened, Lin did not listen to the teacher at all, but practically slept during the lesson. And as expected, this was noticed by the teacher, who did not at all like what Luan was doing in class instead of learning the material. Teacher Ju made the boy stand up and repeat to the class what Newton had said, and the student in turn explained that he still couldn't recover from yesterday, and that's why he was so absent-minded. But they didn't even want to listen to the student, telling him to come back down to earth because it was just an accident. So he should think not about what happened, but about the fact that there were only 2 months left until the state exam. However, Lin was not so sure that the attack was just an accident because the school is always under guard. But yesterday, when the guards were changing, the attackers were able to easily enter the institution in 20 minutes. But it remained a mystery how they managed to do this, because the time for changing the guard is determined the day before. The guard change schedule is only available in the training unit, so it was unclear how this information reached the criminals. Then, one of the students asked if Luan really meant to say that the academic staff had conspired with the attackers so that they could take over the school. Lin explained to the student, whose name was Wang Tianhao, that this was not what he meant at all. But Wang continued to argue with him, proving that there could be no other meaning in the boy's words. Eventually, the teacher ended the argument by ordering Lin Luan to spend the rest of the lesson standing, punishing him for his behavior. And then Luan saw that he had been awarded 1 point for causing hostility on the part of Zhu Dayong, who was a teacher. And this really shocked the boy, because it turned out that you can earn points by arguing with a teacher. During recess, the teenager's friend asked him how he was feeling, to which the boy replied that he was very hungry, so he needed to fix that. The class was already talking about who would take which exams, and everyone assumed that Wang Tianhao would take the exam in supernatural strength, since he was the strongest in the school. Then the student told the others not to worry because he already had enough strength to protect them all. And then Van again focused his attention on Luan, telling him that the guy was a selfish person who only thought about how to escape. After these words, rumors began to circulate around the class that Lin Luan had fled during the attack on the school. But he was not at all concerned about the lives of his comrades. But the teenager was not at all upset by this because before his eyes he saw that he had been given another 10 points due to the fact that he had caused hostility on the part of his classmates due to his selfishness. Then Luan's friend stood up for him, telling Wang Tianhao to shut his mouth and not say anything he didn't know. The green-haired guy responded that Lu Jiahao was probably the same as his friend Lin, because you become like the people you hang out with. And then Van emphasized that Lu was talented enough that there was a chance that after passing the psionic exam, the guy would stop hanging out with such a worthless person like Luan. But these words only angered the protagonist's friend even more. But Tianhao was not afraid of threats because he was the strongest, so the students could not do anything to him. Confident that no one would touch him, Wang was unable to block the slap that unexpectedly flew at him. And then Luan, who had hit the green-haired guy, was given another 5 points for starting a fight with a classmate and causing animosity on the part of Wang Tianhao. It was then that the protagonist realized how points were awarded to him. It turns out that Lin Luan becomes stronger through bad deeds, which seemed like a rather strange system to the guy. Then the student decided that it was time for him to become bad, because if others could be insolent and pretend to be strong, then why couldn't he do the same? But all the hero's agility evaporated the moment the offended van began to advance on the guy, clearly not with friendly intentions. The offended student even decided to use magic to take revenge for the blow his classmate had dealt him. The guy had almost struck, but the protagonist managed to escape, avoiding his terrible fate. However, the student, whose feelings were hurt, did not want to give up so easily, so he decided to deliver another strike called Thunder Palm, which was the technique of the boy's family. But even here, Luan was lucky, because he managed to escape without receiving a single blow. And while Wang Tianhao was scouring the air to finish off his brave classmate, he himself decided to have dinner, because he was very hungry. The main character has already managed to eat 4 pizzas, 2 baked chickens, and 5 steaks, for which he received another point due to gluttony and hostility from the cafe owner. Lu, meanwhile, asked his friend what he was going to do next, as the situation was quite dangerous. But Lin simply decided that he would hide, and that was it, and would do nothing else because, fortunately for him, the next day would be a day off. But the protagonist's friend started talking about the existence of a reagent that could turn anyone into a psionic, and then asked Luan if he wanted to try to become one. Lu noted that his friend was strong enough that even he sometimes had trouble defeating the guy. And if it was all because of the reagent, then the Jiahao family was ready to help Luan with money. But the hero noted that since they were friends, talking about money was inappropriate. Besides, the reagents will cost tens of thousands, and Luan can't just sit on the neck of his friend's father. And then the guy remembered that a press conference was supposed to be broadcast at that moment, so he asked the waiter to turn on the TV. At a press conference of the Association of Supernatural Powers, it was said how the hero defeated 4 criminals. And at the moment when the talented psionicist Ji Fen was called onto the stage, a stranger who had previously wanted to talk to him appeared in his place. The girl announced that Feng would not be able to attend the conference, as he had been urgently hospitalized due to the multiple injuries he had received the previous day. This shocked everyone, because just yesterday everything was fine with the man, and no one expected that something like this could happen. Luan didn't understand at what point the hero managed to get injured, because at most, he could have just been scratched. And then he received a message that his subordinate was dead, on the very screen that the guy began to see after Rebirth. The girl on TV was saying that the hero wouldn't be able to perform anytime soon, and then offered to pray for the psionic's recovery, while the student couldn't understand why this stranger was lying. Lin eventually realized that the whole thing was because the hero had been ordered to tell the truth about his actions yesterday, so he was removed so that he could not tarnish the association. After this, the teenager began to worry that he too might be wanted because of yesterday's incident, because if the association found out about him, the same fate as Fen awaited him. So Luan decided that he needed to be more careful with how he used his abilities so that no one would know about them. The hero was also under pressure from the fact that on Monday, he had to meet with a classmate whom he had recently hit. But for now, he decided not to think about all this. So he went to his mother and asked if there was anything to eat. And then the teenager noticed that his mother was behaving strangely, as if she was hiding something important from him. Suddenly, someone started knocking loudly on the door, shouting that it should be opened as soon as possible. It was an aunt who came running to ask how much money the boy's mother had transferred to the fund. It turned out that the grandson of the director of a pharmaceutical factory had gone on the run, taking with him the 10 million rubles collected by the foundation, and the product turned out to be counterfeit, producing no effect. And Luanya's mother transferred 100,000 to these scammers, which was the woman's father's allowance, which is paid once to the family of the deceased. This is how the hero learned that his mother had purchased a reagent for a large sum of money to strengthen her son's health. And she had done this because of the day when Lin had stayed home from school for a long time, and the woman's plans were simply to help her son become stronger. People who also fell for the scammer's promises began to stage strikes to get all their money back, so there was a chance that they would achieve something. Then the teenager said that he wanted to go for a walk, and then added that there was no need to worry about him because he was just kicking a ball around with Hao. But Luan didn't go to play ball at all, but in fact he headed to the place where the strike was taking place. And while the strikers were discussing what they would do next, Lin calmly jumped over the fence protecting the factory. The teenager found the CEO's office and then decided that he needed to find clues, such as the address where he or his accomplices lived. And then the student could easily sort everything out. And then an unknown man came into this office and asked the hero why he came to this place. Luan recognized the young man as the leader of the protesters and then explained to the man that the back door was open, so he slipped through. Then, the protester said that he understood everything, and then smiled. And this smile did not fit at all with the fact that the message appeared on the sign about +1 point for hostility on the part of Lubin. It turned out that Lubin was the main one among the protesters, and the teenager did not understand where the hostility came from if the student wanted to expose the fraudster. Suspicious, Luan asked the man how he had gotten into the office, and he said that he had also gone through the back door to look for clues. Then the boy began to talk about how the thieves would definitely get what they deserved, because everything would come back to them like a boomerang. The young man hesitantly agreed with the guy's words, and the latter, in turn, saw that he had gained even more points for Lubin's hostility. Then Lin realized that the man was Sun Chagun's accomplice, and that he was pretending to be the victim only to divert suspicion from himself. The teenager decided to use his capture ability, which cost him 50 points, which he had previously accumulated thanks to the hatred of his classmates. By using his power, the boy learned that the con man's abilities included performance, bragging, legal knowledge, and culinary skill. With the help of a high level of performance, one could act in a movie or become a con man, so the student decided to take on this skill. And while Lubin was threatening Luan, he in turn was just waiting for his ability to take effect. Finally, when the power began to take effect, the man fell silent, and then simply called the student master, waiting for orders. The teenager then ordered the con man to explain why he was pretending to be a victim, and he began to explain that there were 3 reasons for this, including the desire to find out how the protesters were feeling, to become their leader, and to gain their trust in order to deceive them again. After hearing his subordinate's plans, Luan ordered him to be taken to Sun Chunggong. Meanwhile, at the Jade Pond Hotel, a girl admired a precious stone called Azure Mica, which had a very high market value. And the owner of this jewel was the same swindler who boasted to the girl that with the help of this stone, he would increase the family fortune. Then the stranger asked Chunggong if he planned to hide for the rest of his life, since everyone was looking for him, and he must be afraid that he might be discovered. To which the man replied that people are like fish. They remember for half a month, and then they forget. And then it will be possible to return. Also, the swindler had 6 bodyguards, so people did not scare him at all. The main character, brought by Lubin, who was carrying out his master's orders, also ended up in this hotel. Thanks to his subordinate, the guy was able to get past security without any problems because the man said that he was one of them. So the student and his virtual slave reached the main swindler, who immediately asked his accomplice if he had been able to calm the rioters. Driven by anger, Lin went to the one who had cheated his mother out of a lot of money. And while the swindler was not expecting it, the teenager hit him, putting all his hatred into that blow. The blow was so strong that Chunggong started bleeding, and the hero called him a worthless pig. The student pushed the man to the floor, and the girl was very scared by this, and so she started screaming. But Luan's subordinate quickly reacted to this, telling the guards not to pay attention as everything was fine. And while the guards thought that their owner was just having fun, the student was able to beat him up to his heart's content as punishment for deception. When the swindler was asked where all the stolen money was, he replied that he didn't have any, because he had invested it all in new spar. The man believed that it was not just a stone, but a mountain mineral that he had purchased from the Wang family's pharmaceutical company. So there was a high probability that it was not a fake. And the criminal sold ordinary stones to people because he took all the feldspars for himself, since he is a gemologist and understands stones. Then the main character thought that the skill of knowing stones would be useful to him in order to find feldspars. Luan decided it was time to bite Chunggong to gain his knowledge of gemology. But the guy couldn't activate his ability because he didn't have enough points to do so. However, the student did not want to back down, so he began to think about who he could earn points from. He eventually decided to go with guards who were normal humans. Not psionics, but they still cost a lot. The boy ordered his subordinate to go out to the guards and tell them that they were all fired, and that he, an ordinary student, would take their place. The man obeyed his master's order and did everything as he was told, and then added that the guard's place was in the garbage dump, not here. Meanwhile, Luan noticed the spar and then decided that it was in it that the thief had invested his entire fortune. When the guy looked at this spar, for some unknown reason his appetite increased, as if he hadn't eaten for a whole week. Therefore, the teenager could not resist and, without thinking twice, ate this precious stone. After this, the hero felt how strength overwhelmed him, and then he understood how exactly the spar should work. And while the guy was enjoying the feeling of power, the security guards decided to interrupt him to figure out why they wanted to fire them. It turned out that these guards were from the most famous company providing personal security services called Gepard. And since this company had professionally trained people, the money paid for them was not small. But even these mercenaries who possess extraordinary skill could not defeat the boy who ate the spar. The student had so much strength that even he himself was surprised at how much his abilities had improved. Looking at the sign, the protagonist realized that he now had enough points to use his power. The man didn't understand what the boy who burst into his room was planning, but even without knowing what would happen next, he was still very scared. The first thing Luan ordered his new subordinate was to stop crying, because the man still couldn't calm down after the bite. It became clear that after subjugation, the characters of those bitten remained the same, which was only to the student's advantage since he did not want them to become soulless puppets. But the most important thing that Lin realized was that by hating his subordinates, he also got points. And since everyone hated Chenggong, he would get a lot of points from it. Luan first thanked the swindler for bringing his master so many points, but then the hero couldn't hold back and hit the thief again, because such a large amount of hatred showed that he had deceived a large number of people. Remembering the people, Lin ordered his subordinates to compensate those who had been deceived within 3 months, and then added that this could be done either with money or with real spatulas. Later, the teenager asked Chenggong whether the Wang family knew about the man's machinations. Since they were his classmates' family, the man replied that these people did indeed know about everything. The hero also gave an order that once his puppets completed the task, they would still have to cooperate with the Wang family, deceiving only them, but not other people. Subordinates will have to find out more about this family, find out what else illegal they are doing, collect all the evidence and report to their boss. The boy left his number with the men so that they would always be under his supervision, and then asked where else he could buy spar cheaply. Then Luan was advised to go to the Schumann market, where many people sell feldspar, and although you can find real ones, there are also plenty of suspicious people, so you need to be careful. And while Lin was calmly walking around the market looking at the goods, some man ran into him and practically knocked the teenager off his feet. On the phone, the man talked about getting rid of the goods as quickly as possible, and just as the hero recovered from the blow, someone crashed into him again. But this time, it was the girl who had previously been talking on the phone about the suspect heading towards Liulu Alley. The teenager asked the stranger if they had all conspired, and she, in turn, apologized and hurried forward. It seemed that the stranger was running after the very man who had collided with Luan earlier. But then everyone saw that this was not just a man running past, but a man with real strength. The stranger swung at the girl who was chasing him, trying to somehow stop her. But with this blow, the man also hit ordinary passers-by. Then Lin noticed that this stranger had the ability of gigantism, just like the villains from the school, so most likely this man was their accomplice. Then another man appeared and began commanding the others to cordon off all the passages and drive the criminal to the old alley, since there were no people there. It turned out that it was Thunder Tiger Wang Man, Wang Tianhao's uncle, who always bragged about him in class. A classmate was always bragging about his uncle, who was a 5-star psionicist, so Luan immediately recognized the man. Upon seeing the criminal, the hero immediately attacked him, activating his abilities to attack. The villain tried to escape, but he failed because the psionic was much faster, so he quickly found himself next to the criminal. And while the fugitive did not understand what was happening and was simply looking at the man, he used his strength to strike. The attack was so powerful that the criminal was thrown back several meters. The man began to beg the tiger not to kill him, and then promised that he would not tell anything, and could even swear to it. And then the psionic replied that he believed the man's words because the dead can be trusted. The tiger began to ask the criminal where the goods were, and if he answered, they would even be able to identify his body. And then the fugitive began to say that he would tell everything if they let him go. Wang Man then added that even if the man didn't tell him, the psionicist could easily find another way to get the information. The criminal then decided to fight for his life, but the tiger only ridiculed him, calling this attempt childish fun. The 5-star hero was able to tear his opponent apart with one blow without even putting in much effort. And Lin also saw everything that was happening because he followed his classmate's uncle to see where he was going. Because the boy came out of his hiding place because he was too shocked by what was happening, it seemed that the tiger noticed him. Even though the teenager managed to hide, the psionic still heard some noise and asked who exactly was hiding like that. when the boy himself already understood that he was finished. The protagonist understood that since he had heard this conversation, he would definitely not be left alive, so he needed to come up with something quickly. Then the boy decided to bite the man, but it turned out that he did not have enough points for this because the enemy's life force exceeded his own. Meanwhile, the tiger was getting closer and closer to the boy, who didn't know what to do now. And then there was some noise nearby. The psionic was distracted by it, so this was a chance to escape, which the teenager immediately took advantage of. However, the man still managed to see the person running away, but was unable to make out who exactly it was. But Wang Man was not going to let go of the one who overheard such an important conversation so easily, shouting that the guy should not even think about escaping from the man. The psionic ordered the others to grab the teenager, thinking that he was an accomplice of the defeated criminal, so everyone rushed to search. Lin kept running, hiding behind different buildings, and then he realized that he had reached a dead end and could no longer escape from those who were looking for him. The teenager had already decided that this was definitely the end for him, since there was nowhere to run and the enemies were already approaching. But then hands appeared from the wall. These hands grabbed the guy, covering his mouth so that he would not make any unnecessary sounds that could give him away. As a result, the tiger and his team did not see anyone behind this wall, and Luan did not understand how this happened. And while the boy was one step away from his opponents, they decided that he had managed to escape. Then the guy realized that he was saved by a girl named Shilili, who was an inspector, because that was written on her badge. And then, unexpectedly, the tiger, in anger, hit the wall where the boys were hiding. But fortunately, the blow didn't hit the people, but it was very close to them, so they were very lucky that they weren't hit. And then the 5-star psionics people informed him that the goods had been found, thereby distracting his attention, which had previously been focused on finding the guy. Then the tiger ordered everyone to leave, leaving behind the one who had been eavesdropping on his conversation, because he had other things to do than play tag with the unknown boy. As soon as the man left, Luan began asking Lily a lot of questions, but the girl did not answer any of them, ordering the guy to leave quickly. Lin was surprised at how indifferent the girl who saved his life turned out to be. At the place where the goods were hidden, the tiger began to interrogate the person working there, asking him if the man he had recently killed had any other accomplices, to which he received the answer that the man killed was the last one. These criminals worked together with Chunggong, carried out robberies, and then hid the spar among the building stones to divert suspicion. And then the girl who saved the guy turned to the tiger, calling the man a commander, and he then asked if it was her doing that someone managed to hide from him. After this, Wang Man asked Lily whether appraisers had been sent along with her, as they needed to be sent to this place as soon as possible. Then the student decided that the girl and the Thunder Tiger were from different squads, and the man wanted to remove Lily in order to take sole possession of the spars. Meanwhile, Tiger told the girl that her inspection department was only good at informing on and interfering with others, and then ordered her to get out. And since Lily needed someone who understood stones, the guy decided to pretend that he was from the civil service, because he had talents for performing and gemology, so he could handle it. Then the boy asked if he would need to look for spar here, and then said that it was nearby, so he came quickly. And then the guy pretended to be a big fan of the tiger, and then introduced himself to him as Lily's friend and a gemologist. After the teenager finished admiring the man, he said that it was time to get to work. Wang Man asked the girl if it was really her friend from the inspection department, to which she replied in the affirmative. Although the guy knows that feldspar is a crystal formed through diopsidization and under the influence of supernatural power, it can also be found in plants, animals, but most often in minerals. The teenager introduced himself as a gemologist, a specialist who certifies stones based on their texture, color, and subtle vibrations of supernatural power. But the problem was that he knew nothing about it. And then the guy saw on the table that he could use points to increase the level of his abilities. While the student was sorting out his powers, people around him began to doubt that he would be able to find anything. Meanwhile, the tiger was thinking that the boy's back looked like the one who had managed to escape from him. Suddenly, the guy asked everyone to be quiet, because they were interfering with his search. But people continued to say that Lin was just fooling them, since such a young specialist would not be able to cope with such a difficult task. Meanwhile, Luan had raised his gemology level to master, so now he began to feel the fluctuations of supernatural power. Then the guy turned to those whose strength is very great, because such people interfere with his work, and he told them not to breathe, because it knocks him down. After this, the newly minted gemologist immediately found a level A feldspar, because he felt the power that emanates from such stones. As a result, out of 32 boxes, 12 contained level C feldspars, and 2 contained level A feldspars. The boy labeled everything and told the others to handle the loading, since he wasn't a psionicist himself, so physical labor wasn't for him. After that, Lin went with Lily, telling her his thoughts that the tiger most likely wanted to push the girl away in order to take everything for himself. And besides, the man was familiar with those villains, so they were probably in cahoots. And when Lily asked about evidence, the student told her that she was an inspector from the association, so she could investigate the matter herself and find evidence. The girl then explained that Wang Man was the commander of the 9th Detachment of the Reconnaissance Group, so she could not file a case against him based only on the student's words. Lily explained that there was no way to get under the tiger's skin, and then asked the guy for his number and address. Luan decided that he had managed to interest the girl, and she asked for his information so that she could later ask him out on a date, which the guy was very happy about, although he gave his school address instead of his own so that his mother would not have questions, and then added that he was in his last year of school. However, Lily asked for this data not for herself, but for the association, which could reward the student for helping them in the investigation. And then the guy added that he didn't need a reward, and it would be better if the girl just let herself be bitten, after which he received a point for hostility from Lily. After this, the girl reported to her boss that the feldspar was found thanks to a high school student who had an amazing ability in gemology. The teenager's thoughts were occupied with the fact that he needed to find evidence that would prove the tiger's guilt, because Lily said that without evidence she could not do anything. The scammer's goal was to profit from gullible people, and if the scammers were in league with the Thunder Tiger, then that meant they were in league with the entire Wang family. The boy was worried that no one had come to class yet, although many usually come early, but here everyone for some reason decided to be late. Then 2 of Luanya's classmates started discussing that no one had come to class because Wang Tianhao and Lu Jiahao had made a date, so they ran to see her. A crowd of students gathered on the sports ground to watch 2 classmates fight, and then Li managed to hit his opponent so hard that he fell to the ground. Then Jihao said that he had won, because they had agreed that whoever fell first would lose, which meant that Wang must now keep his promise and not bother Lin Luan anymore. However, Tianhao didn't want to accept that he had lost, so he said he didn't care about words and continued fighting. Then someone from the crowd pushed Li, causing the guy to lose his balance and become distracted from his opponent. Van took advantage of his classmate's confusion and hit him hard, saying that he was the strongest in this school so he couldn't be defeated. Tianhao summoned his ability to hit his opponent so hard that his bones would break, so that he could be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. Wang had already swung but was unable to hit, because Lin stopped him, and he arrived in time to save his friend. No one knew that Luan had such strength, so everyone present was surprised by the guy's appearance. After this, the hero asked his friend why he started fighting with his classmate, since this was not a solution to the problem. And then Lu explained that he was just tired of seeing his friend hiding after school every day, so he decided to settle the matter. Meanwhile, Van was so angry about what happened that he even blushed from the feelings that overwhelmed him. There was a buzz of voices in the crowd of those who witnessed everything, some saying that Wang was no longer the strongest in the school, while others believed that the boy had simply been attacked unexpectedly, and that was why he had been unable to dodge. Tianhao did not like being humiliated like that, so he was ready to fight further to defend his honor. The friend's enemy was furious, so they began to think about what to do now, since running away was probably not an option at all. Lu asked his friend to teach him the punch that was used on their opponent as soon as possible. Then the teenager began to teach that one must concentrate, then concentrate all one's strength fueled by anger in one's legs and run. While running away, Lin also managed to ridicule his opponent, so that they ran after him. Luan managed to escape far enough for him and his classmate to be alone, and then confessed that he thought it was Wang who stole the shift change schedule for the villains, since the Wang family was in cahoots with the criminals. The protagonist said that he knew everything, and that he even knew that his opponent's uncle had killed the witness, and then added that he was giving his classmate a chance to confess. Otherwise, he would report everything himself to the association's inspection department. Wang, in turn, did not even deny the teenager's accusations and even praised Luan for being smart enough. Later, Tianhao even admitted that it was indeed he who suggested the idea of stealing the schedule to his father. It turned out that last year, Wang found the key to the study area and kept it for himself, initially not even thinking that it would be useful. It turns out that for the sake of the spar, Tianhao put his own classmates at risk, and he wasn't even ashamed of it, because he considers everyone just a bunch of trash. Van also believed that it was entirely justified, since he would become a psionicist in the future, so thanks to him, the lives of others would become better. and Luan's classmate tells everything so boldly, only because he plans to beat him up so badly that the teenager will remain disabled for the rest of his days, and then he will put a key in the boy's pocket to make him the villain. Lin responded that his opponent was such a nasty guy that he didn't even want to bite him, so instead of biting, he called on his strongest ability. So the classmates faced off in a very dangerous battle, deciding to use all their abilities to the maximum. Luan was so fast that Wang couldn't keep up with his speed, wondering how his opponent could do it. And while Lin was saying that the association was rotten because of people like his classmate, Tianhao himself didn't understand where someone like Lin got such speed from. Finally, while Wang was at a loss, his classmate managed to hit him, saying that this was for all his actions. Although the protagonist was able to land numerous blows on his opponent, who in turn never responded to them, Van still considered himself the strongest. Meanwhile, Luan struck again, shouting that this was his way of avenging his schoolmates who had died because of his opponent's actions. The blow was so strong that he could no longer move his leg because his spine was broken. And then Lin told his classmate that he had a broken spine, so now it was unknown whether he would ever be able to stand on his feet, and he certainly would not be able to become a psionicist. Wang started shouting that he would tell everything to his father and uncle so that they would kill Luan and his entire family. And then the main character confessed that the Wang family could no longer escape punishment because the teenager had written down his opponent's entire story, so now he had evidence. The guy sent this recording to Lily, because it was she who said that if evidence was found, then a case could be opened on the tiger. And while Lin was fighting Tianhao, his friend at the time was also not idle, defeating 2 accomplices of their main enemy. 2 weeks later, Lily informed the protagonist that the Wang family was finished, because thanks to the evidence, she was able to begin an investigation. And it turned out that this family was in collusion with the perpetrators. Luan's classmate will never be able to walk again, and will also be sent to a juvenile detention center. But Thunder Tiger has no direct connection to the scam, so he could not be brought to justice. And the murder of a witness means nothing because he was the perpetrator, so it does not go beyond the scope of official duties. But the boy shouldn't worry about the tiger because once the man's family was caught in crimes, he won't be able to do anything against the student. After talking to Luan on the phone, Lily approached her teacher, who said that Lin was an interesting guy, but in her opinion, he clearly wasn't eager to join the association. Then the teacher told Lily not to rush into her opinion about the guy because he needed to be given time. Meanwhile, the guy had a state exam, the first stage of which is to take a blood test for the presence of psionic energy. All of the protagonist's classmates told him that he would definitely not be able to pass the test. But it turned out that only Lin Lual and Lu Jiahao from the class passed it, which no one expected. Those who passed this stage were asked to go to the Western basketball court, so the heroes went there. There, the heroes met 3 more students who had passed the first stage, which surprised Lu, since usually 2 people from their school pass, but now 5 people had passed. One of those who passed the first stage was Chen Daoji, who showed his worth while still in school, as he had limitless potential. Ruan Liuxi also passed this stage. She was the best in all subjects, attends all courses at school, and she is very smart. And the third one who also passed was Lin Si, who is an inventor and loves to understand technology. The students didn't understand why they had gathered everyone together when none of the teachers came to them, and then they heard some noise. Then they noticed the cat, so they decided that it was the cat that was making the noise. However, then the teenagers saw a man who asked them if they had passed the qualification. The students were surprised by the man's unexpected appearance, as they were waiting for teachers to explain everything to them. Afterwards, the stranger added that the embryos should be pulled out at the beginning of growth, and then shouted for Lala to go. It turned out that the cat was not an ordinary animal, because it was the same Lala to whom the man had given the order. The students immediately realized that this was no ordinary cat, but a spiritual beast that they would have to fight. The protagonist didn't understand why the psionic was attacking them, so he grabbed the phone to call someone. But the man, as soon as he saw the phone in the teenager's hands, said that there was no need to call the police. And then the stranger himself also entered the battle. Summoning weapons for himself, he was ready to fight. The man used an ability called Rounded Strokes on Luan, and then the boy decided to use his power. But he didn't succeed because he didn't have enough points, as the opponent's life force exceeded his own. Lin Luan realized that the strength of the one who attacked them was on par with the Thunder Tiger, so it would be difficult to defeat him. After this, the student shouted to his friend to distract the attacker for a while, and he agreed to help his comrade. Jiahao then told the others to scatter in different directions and try to call the police. After hearing the teenager's plan, the man replied that calling the police was against the rules, so he would not allow them to do so. As soon as the stranger said this, at that very moment he knocked the phones out of the hands of those who were trying to call. While the others were fighting for their phones, the girl was trying to escape from the cat, which was ready to attack anyone. But the animal was unable to catch up with Lyusha because she was saved by the main character, who quickly got his bearings and pushed the cat away. And although the man appreciated the teenager's speed, he was still sure that the student would not be able to cope with Lala alone. The cat, meanwhile, had already switched all its attention to the main character, forgetting about the girl she was pursuing. Luan understands that Lala is as fast as he is, and he only has the ability to run away, but not to attack. So if they catch up with him, the guy is finished. The student then decided that the only way to defeat the cat was to take control of it by waiting for the right moment. So he allowed Lala to get as close to him as possible. A stranger saw this and started shouting for the guy to move away and for the cat to stop because it was a dangerous moment. And when Lala got close enough for the guy, he used his ability to capture, spending almost all of his points on it. But Lin accepted that winning was more important than the points he had accumulated. So he bid her anyway, spending 1,000 of his points. The man watching this did not understand what was happening and what the student was doing. Lala's list of abilities included perception, flexibility, playfulness, shadow walking, sharp claws, and the image of a Buddha. Having chosen one of the cat's talents, the guy began to wait for the subjugation to work in order to finally calm Lala down. But instead of submitting, the cat turned into a large, unknown beast, ready to continue the fight. Seeing that everything was getting out of control, the stranger ordered Lala to stop, and she became a calm, sweet cat again. Afterwards, the man told the boys to calm down too, confusing everyone he had forced to fight. The stranger explained that he only wanted to test and evaluate the students' abilities, and then apologized for frightening them so much. It turned out that this man's name was Gu Yunqiao, and he was the teacher of the boys that his cat fought with. All the students, except the main character, were crazy about this news because Yunqiao was the coolest psionicist in their school, because he was a level 5 and was part of the association's preliminary investigation department. According to Luan's friend, their teacher was a scourge for villains, as he had solved countless cases, and he was also handsome and cunning. The man's spiritual energy takes the form of 10 meters. In his right hand he holds a brush, and in his left hand he holds the Book of Life and Death. The students were delighted, calling their teacher the wonderful Panguan and talking about how lucky they were. But the psionicist said that the children should simply call him their mentor, and that would be enough. And then the man noted that 5 students had passed this year, and there had never been such a large number before, which is why the director called the hero to teach. Then the teacher added that the second stage of the exam would take place in 6 months, so they should have time to prepare well for it. Meanwhile, the cat did not leave Luan's side, and then the mentor noticed how much Layla liked the boy. Afterwards, Yunqiao suggested that the children move to a special class for training psionicists to discuss the second stage of the exam in more detail. The teacher told the students that supernatural power has several gradations, and there are 7 levels in total, including absorbing, cyclical, manifested, transforming, taking form, chaotic, and spiritual enlightenment. And then, Lu noticed that their mentor was already at level 5, even though he was only 25 years old. And there were only a few of them in the association. Yunqiao explained that in reality, it was not worth drawing conclusions about a person's strength based on their level, since level was more dependent on luck. The teacher took the Thunder Tiger as an example, whose trump card is that he can gather energy in his hand, so he created a technique called Thunder Fist, and one can say that its level is somewhere between the second and third. But since Wang has perfected his technique to the maximum, he is capable of breaking through a mountain. So if he is compared with Yunqiao, the tiger will most likely win. So the association decided to admit that the tiger's strength is comparable to the 5th. Therefore, you shouldn't get hung up on just the level, but rather find your own style in using energy, and then create your own personal technique and become the best at what you do. But it was too early to talk about this, because now the student's task is to concentrate on absorption and cyclicality. Absorption means that one must absorb supernatural power, and the human body absorbs this power gradually. Students can increase the amount of power they absorb through regular training, and after taking a medicine containing 5% power, teenagers will need a day to absorb it. Luan then asked if the medicine was practically the same as feldspar, and then the teacher said that the concentration of force in spar exceeds 80%, so it is so dangerous that one can die. The protagonist was surprised by this information, and then decided that it was thanks to the system that the spar did not have a detrimental effect on him. Next comes the second level, called cyclicity, which means that after absorption the force begins to circulate in the body, strengthening it, allowing a person to surpass his physical capabilities. In theory, it is possible to strengthen all parts of the body, but most people focus on strengthening certain ones to achieve results faster. During these 2 weeks, students will have to take a lot of medication. But they shouldn't worry, because the school and their mentor will take care of all the expenses, so teenagers just need to take advantage of the opportunity. And now that the guys have figured out the theory, it's time to move on to practice. The teenagers began to train a lot. And after they had used up all their strength and taken the medicine, the students trained even more, and then more, and more, and more. The teacher told the children that if they didn't make it to the top of the mountain, which was only 10 kilometers away, they would have to do a long plank. Although everyone was already exhausted, the main character and his friends suddenly began to compete to see who was faster, which helped them move forward. Thus, the friends reached the top of the mountain together, continuing to argue about who was stronger. Yahello then noted that his friend's progress was very noticeable, even though he had said that he did not want to take the exam. But now he was trying so hard. And Lin explained to him that he was trying to become stronger, and not for the sake of the exam, because the guy hadn't even decided yet whether he wanted to take it at all. After all, if he is going to take the exam, he will definitely fall under the control of the association, and the guy doesn't want that. Because the hero had already told those who were from the association, and practically no one inspired his trust. While the guys were talking, the other students were also gradually reaching the top. However, they were 3 minutes late, so now they have to hold the plank for an hour. And so that Hao and Luan wouldn't just watch their comrades suffer, they were told to keep the others company. The friends first started arguing that they were being forced to do the plank even though they had managed to run. And then Lin asked the teacher if the association was a good place. Then the mentor replied that although the association is not perfect, isn't that why you should try to join it? To make this place better? The teacher himself joined the association when he was 17 years old. And he did this in order to make the association an even brighter place. Although the psionicist thought that his speech sounded naive, it really inspired the boys, who wanted to become like their mentor. So the entire 15 days passed, and then came the second stage of the exam, for which the students prepared eagerly. Having gathered their strength, the teenagers went to the second round of the supernatural power exam. At this stage, many children from different schools gathered. And this was only a fifth of all people because there are 4 more meeting points for the exam. Because of this, the teenagers began to doubt whether they could compete with such a number of people. The unified exam of supernatural power is the primary test of skill, in which all competitors will undergo 5 events, including shooting, strength, assault, sensory, and running, each of which can be scored a maximum of 100 points, with the top 1,200 competitors advancing to the final 3rd round. Before the competition even started, all the kids gathered in a self-service cafe where they shared their experiences with each other. And while everyone was worried, Lin Luan ate calmly, because the food was free and also delicious. Then Hao decided that his friend was right and told everyone that they needed to eat well to have strength. Then 3 people came into the cafe, one of whom made fun of Luan for being seemingly always hungry. And Lin, in turn, immediately received 10 points for hostility from Fu Guangkun. The teenager did not understand why he was immediately disliked so much if he had done nothing. It turned out that this guy's father is on the State Development and Reform Committee, and he is Hao's father's boss. Fu Guangkun told the teenagers that it was as if they had come for a free meal, not for an exam, and then added that he did not want to offend anyone, but simply wanted to share his experience. Speaking so that the entire cafe could hear him, Guangkun began to explain that this round would not be so easy, since last year some contestants broke their arms due to improper use of force. Everyone in the cafe started talking about how Guangkun liked to bully other teenagers, so it was a shame for the 5 kids he scared to death. But this guy failed to intimidate the main character, because he saw the strength of his opponent. Knowing that he could use his ability on him, the student offered to measure their strength when the exam began. Lin decided to make a deal where if he won, his opponent would wish Luan's team good luck in front of the entire school. But if the opposite happened, the main character would drop out of school after the exam and never return. Hao thought his friend was crazy because Guangkun was considered the strongest student in his school, and this agreement was too risky. The guy ridiculed Luan for being so self-confident that he even dared to challenge him. Guangkun was very popular, and when he was challenged to a shooting competition, the other participants began to whisper that the guy was good at every event. The teenager's final shooting score was 87, which was a very good result. But the guy did not show his joy, saying that today's result was acceptable for him. And while this popular young man was thinking that the guy who challenged him had some kind of trump card in his head, he in turn got 42 points in the shooting and considered himself to be quite good. Others were very worried about the main character because of his argument, and he showed such a bad result. The participants were then asked to prepare for the strength test competition that was next. Participant number 068, Fu Guangkun, received a final strength score of 89, and the participant number 143, Lin Luan, received only 65 points, which was inferior to his opponent's points. Therefore, the main character's opponent realized that he was worried about Luan in vain because he turned out to be too weak. Meanwhile, Lin calmly continued eating, as if nothing had happened, even though he understood that if he lost, he would have to drop out of school. Then the student's friends started scolding him because how could it be that the boy was 69 points behind, but still found time to eat? Luan reassured everyone that they shouldn't lose their enthusiasm just yet, as they could still show others how strong they were. The next test was a sensory test in which all participants had to go into their rooms, which contained 300 rats, and in this task they had to find one rat in which a spar was hidden. And while Lin was thinking that it was his turn to show himself, his rival at the same time decided to sort everything out as quickly as possible because he considered rats an abomination. And while the participants in the sensory test were asked to go to their rooms, two figures appeared in the background. It turned out that these were not just strangers, but Lily and her mentor, the head of the supervision department, Yan Mu. Lily pointed out to the man the teenager she had told him about earlier, and then asked the teacher if the student would be able to pass this dangerous round. And then the two people met Zhao Chenlin, who is the deputy head of the public security department, and it was with her that the protagonist recently crossed paths. Zhao asked Lily and her boss what they were doing there, to which she received a question in response, explaining her presence by saying that there had been an increase in murders lately, so she was looking around and giving everyone advice. Then a noise was heard on their platform, and it turned out that it was all because someone had passed the test very quickly. At that moment, Guangkun was just coming out, so he decided that all this applause was in his honor. And the guy had already begun to thank the crowd rushing towards him, but the people in turn pushed him away, hurrying to someone else. Then the self-confident teenager realized that all these enthusiastic shouts were not in his honor, which meant that someone had completed the task faster. It turned out that all attention was focused on Luan, because he found the spar in 10 seconds, while his opponent needed 2 minutes. The protagonist explained this result by the fact that as soon as the door opened, the rat with the spar immediately ran out to his foot, and he in turn instantly caught it. But it doesn't matter how, because Luan won anyway and received 100 points for it, starting to catch up with his opponent. And while Lin was overjoyed at his victory, he didn't even notice that he was approaching the woman he met on the first day of receiving his power. He was so busy thinking about how there were still 2 tests left, meaning there was still a chance, that he didn't even pay any attention to the stranger who called out to him. And then the girl decided that she was simply mistaken, since she did not receive any reaction. But it turned out that Luan recognized her, but simply did not show any sign. The next test for the participants was a 400-meter race, and it so happened that the main character ended up in the same group as his opponent. Fu Guang was confident that he would win, but then Lin told him that at school he always came first in races. This is what happened this time too, as Luan ran faster than everyone else and received 100 points for this test, while his opponent received 75 for it. But the protagonist's opponent didn't want to believe he was defeated, so he started shouting that the race wouldn't decide anything, but the next test would definitely be his. And the final test was an assault, in which the participants had to kill as many bats as possible within 5 minutes. And then Fu Guang said that this test was definitely his, because not only was he strong, but Lin was still 22 points behind him. Luan understood that even if he killed one mouse after another, he would not be able to catch the required number in 5 minutes, and so he began to think if there were any other ways to win. And then the teenager remembered his teacher's words about how to activate his ability by releasing his spiritual energy outward. Lin actually began to release his spiritual energy, thinking that bats were very good at detecting ultrasonic vibrations. Fohui noticed that the bats were flying in one direction, so he tracked where exactly the animals were moving. And then he realized that they were all flying towards Luan, surprised that the hero decided to risk his life for the sake of victory, because the bats could easily bite the student to death. The protagonist's rival tried to save him, shouting at him to quickly hide his spiritual power because there were too many bats, so it would be difficult to defeat them all. Meanwhile, Lin waited until there were enough bats to activate his power, and as soon as the number of mice became very large, the teenager used his power on them all, killing all the mice that surrounded him with a couple of moves. It turned out that Luan killed a record number of mice and surpassed all the people who had taken the exam before him from all over China. Thus, for the assault, the main character received 99 points, killing 435 mice in 5 minutes, and his total number of points was 406. His opponent received 69 points for the assault, making the total number of points 398. This meant that Lin had won the argument, and his opponent was obliged to fulfill his part of the bargain, which included supporting Luan's school. The rest of the students at the protagonist's school were in a different group, and the competition would start for them after lunch, so Lin tried his best to support the kids. As a result, Liu Jiahao received a total of 404 points after all the competitions. Chen Daoji received a total of 341 points, which was a good result. Participant Lin Sei received 334 points, falling just short of his friend. Ruan Liuxi received a total of 352 points, and since all 5 candidates from the protagonist school showed such a good result, they all eventually advanced to the final round. The teenagers were happy to have shown such an excellent result, so they went to celebrate with their teacher. The mentor told the students that the final selection was in 3 days, so they should try not to worry, believe in themselves, and get a good rest. In a good mood, Jiahao saw that he was receiving a call, so he decided to step away for a moment to talk on the phone. The teenager's dad called, and as soon as the boy answered, his father said something to him that immediately changed the student's mood. The news reported that there had been an increase in attacks by criminals in the eastern region recently, so all citizens were asked to be more vigilant. Meanwhile, the heroes were checking into a hotel for participants in the final qualifying exam for psionics in the Eastern District, as the final test would take place in a park in the suburbs where the protagonist and his comrades lived. The students were happy that the competition was taking place in their hometown, so they decided that they should try their best. And then the teenagers' conversation was interrupted by Lin, who asked the others if they had seen Hao. Then everyone decided that the boy had stayed at home, where he had gone on business before. However, the main character was still worried because his friend wasn't picking up the phone, but then he decided to wait a little longer. Luan's patience ran out soon enough, so he hurried to look for his comrade because he couldn't just disappear the day before the final exam, which was very important to him. The teenager ran to Hao's house and noticed that there were no lights on anywhere, which was very puzzling because something could have happened. Then Lin went into the house, and after walking around, the teenager found the manager's body in a terrible state in the wine cellar. And then the boy immediately called his mentor to tell him the news that Hao and his family were missing. The student also added that he found the manager, who was dead and looked like a deceased mummy. Then the mentor ordered the teenager to leave this place immediately, and the man himself would send someone to the house in the meantime, since he himself was unable to come. But the main character didn't want to leave, so he decided to wait for the psionic on the spot. And then he heard some noise, deciding that it was the association that arrived so quickly. But it turned out to be an unknown man who spoke on the phone about how he would deal with the body, and then added that he hated covering up other people's tracks. With a displeased look, the man grabbed the corpse by the head with one hand, as if it weighed nothing. After this, the man told the body to disappear and burned it using samadhi fire. The stranger scattered the remaining ashes to the wind, reporting by phone that everything was settled and a handful of ashes would not be considered evidence, and then said that he would be there soon, having driven off somewhere in a car. The main character didn't want to leave his friend in trouble, so he decided to follow the car to find out where the man went. The car was moving quite fast, but Luan kept up with it, wanting to find his comrade, who was now in danger. And this stranger led him to a building that Lin immediately recognized, because it was the trading building of Hao's father. It turned out that there were many people in this place who began to talk about the fact that the leader of the Red Puppets had returned. The first thing the stranger was greeted by was the criminal Lu Qin, who said that the man had done a good job. Then the criminals Zhao Shuyu and Zhao Shudong approached the unknown man and made it clear to the man that he had been messing around with such an ordinary businessman for a long time. Liu Jiahao's father, Liu Tianming, was also there, telling the criminals to let his son go, and then he would do whatever he wanted. Then Lu Qin told him not to worry because if he cooperated, no one would get hurt, and then promised that they would sort everything out by tomorrow's lunch. In the end, the attackers didn't know where the key to the cage was, and then Shuyu couldn't take it anymore and simply broke it. However, only the father was taken from the cage, and the son was forced to continue sitting quietly in it. One of the criminals said that he and his father would go and sort out some issues and return for dinner, while the rest should remain quiet so that the association's psionics wouldn't show up. Then Shuden said that she wanted to go too, but they still left her to watch the hostage. Shudan decided that she was now in charge, so she told the others to do what she wanted, and then ordered a boy with slicked-back hair to be brought to her. The girl was immediately obeyed, and a hostage was thrown at her feet for her to look after. After that, Shudong told the boy that his father knew that they were both already corpses, but her sister said that Tianming would agree to cooperate to save her son's life. And because of such a heroic act, the girl was so touched that she told the hero that he could run like a stray dog to call the police, because this was his last chance to save himself. And then Shudong added that if her people did catch the teenager, he would be in big trouble. Then the teenager ran, not to save himself but to save his father. But the guy didn't manage to run far because he was pushed and caught up because he had fallen. The boy begged to be let go because he wanted to save his father, but one of the villains said that it was not interesting, getting ready to beat the teenager. But the attacker didn't have time to do this, because Luan came running to his friend's aid, cutting off the man's leg, which he swung at the defenseless student. At that moment, Jihao realized that things weren't so bad anymore, because he was no longer alone, but with a loyal comrade. Lin shouted at the villains not to dare touch his friend, otherwise they would get into trouble. Then, Jihao asked what Luan was doing in this place, and the teenager told him the whole situation and how he ended up there. And instead of gratitude, the main character heard screams that it would have been better if he had called the police than risked his life. And while the friends were arguing, Shudong noticed that Luan's spiritual energy was fluctuating, which meant that his power had awakened not long ago, so they definitely wouldn't be able to escape. And Jihao agreed with her, because the criminals were much stronger than the teenagers, so Luan shouldn't have come. The main character realized that they really couldn't win that easily, and so he suddenly hit his friend so hard that he lost consciousness. The attackers were very surprised by this outcome, because their opponents must rarely take their allies out of the game. The boy explained this action by saying that since they couldn't win in a regular fight, they needed to resort to an unusual method, since the teenager was prepared for trouble and had accumulated a large number of points to use his power. And when the student was attacked by one of the criminals, the teenager quickly used the ability of subjugation, expecting the result. After this, the boy told the attackers to attack all at once, thinking of subjugating as many people as possible. Laughing at the boy's self-confidence, the criminals rushed towards him in a crowd, not noticing how he began to bite them all in order to then take over their minds. Shuden then began to worry that the boy would be killed too quickly, and she wouldn't even have time to have fun. But then the girl noticed that everyone suddenly stopped fighting and simply stood still, like dolls. The main character was happy because he had enough points to use the power of subjugation on everyone. With the help of his ability, the guy saw that this girl was the strongest among the others, because to use the ability on her, you had to spend 1,000 points. But luckily for the student, he had 3,000 points, so he had enough to zombify Shudong. The girl, meanwhile, thought that the other attackers had stopped to allow her to finish off the teenager herself. Meanwhile, Luan ordered all his subordinates to attack the unaware attacker together. Shuden didn't understand what those who were supposed to obey her were doing, because they had completely stopped following her orders. When the girl realized that this was no joke and that the others were really trying to harm her, she immediately turned into a monster, activating her power. And then the attacker shouted at the guy that since he had done something to her henchman, he could now say goodbye to his head. But she was unable to attack because the teenager was protected by one of the villains controlled by Lin. Everyone the student was controlling also activated their abilities and then attacked all at once, making it much harder for Shudong to fight them all off. Meanwhile, Luan was thinking that this was the first time he had encountered such a powerful psionic, and that from now on, villains like this girl would appear on the boy's path more and more often. The teenager understood that when he accumulated enough points to activate the capture ability, then he would be able to fight all the villains. But for now, he needed to become stronger. After these thoughts, the boy ordered his slaves to release Shudong so that he could fight her himself. The girl first asked why everyone listened to the guy and not her, and then asked how the teenager was going to overcome her. And then Lin threw the ball, and Shudong could not resist the temptation and ran after him. This made the attacker even more angry because she wanted the student to fight her seriously, and then he asked her why she decided that he was not serious. While the girl was distracted, Lin tried to suddenly attack her, but the villain was able to dodge. The fight continued in the same spirit, with the two opponents trying to hit each other but always managing to dodge. Shudong knew that at this rate she would use up all her spiritual power if she continued to remain in animal form. Then the attacker remembered how her sister taught her a technique that could help her shape her energy. The criminal decided to do as her sister taught her to create a spiritual body. Thanks to Shudong's careful listening, she was eventually able to create shadow cats, but she knew she couldn't hold out for more than 15 seconds. Then, the villainess immediately ordered her cats named Grape Strelka, and Griffin to attack the teenager. It turned out that these clots of energy that Shudong created were supposed to explode on command, and so she ordered them to surround Luan so that he could not escape. The girl's plan worked, as the Shadow Cats were able to quickly surround the hero and explode, so Shudong decided that she had already won this fight. But it turned out that Lin remained virtually unharmed after the explosion, so he struck the criminal again. And this time Shudong didn't have time to dodge, because she was too surprised by how Luan withstood her attack. The girl didn't understand how it happened that the guy remained unharmed after the bombs, because she clearly saw that they hit the teenager. Then Lin explained to the attacker that he had simply managed to copy the ability to harden the skin, which one of the girl's accomplices had, so this power protected him. And later the student admitted that he copied more than 20 skills and improved some of them with the help of glasses. And while Shudong was trying to understand what the boy was talking about, he himself added that his rival had already used up all her spiritual energy. So in this battle, victory was Luan's. As the boy approached the attacker, she remembered her sister's words, who said that girls would no longer tolerate bullies, but would become the most powerful psionics. Then the criminal began to cry for Lin not to kill her, because then it would be bad for her sister. The teenager reassured the girl, saying he didn't want to kill her, but simply wanted to teach her a lesson. Meanwhile, he copied her power, called Shadow Cat, and in the end, the guy only had 32 points left. Shudong was very grateful to Luan for not killing her. Having dealt with the girl, the student ordered all his subordinates to go in search of the villains who had left. And in the meantime, Yahello woke up. The protagonist's friend didn't know what was going on, so he started fighting whoever was currently on their side. After that, the guy found Luan and asked what was going on, and then he thought that he and his friend had simply been captured. Lin told his comrade that he didn't remember anything because he was hit by the villains. And then Yahello decided to act according to the previous plan to defeat all the enemies. And then Luan told his friend that there was no longer any need to fight, because the people around them were no longer villains. The student didn't want to reveal his power, so he started making up a reason for why their enemies had become good, telling them on the fly that they had just had a conversation. And after that, the villains admitted their mistakes and wanted to improve. In confirmation of the young man's words, his subordinates began to shout that they realized their guilt and wanted to change. According to Luan, it was because he was simply a great speaker, and that was why he was able to convince all the criminals. And in the end, Yahello decided that there was no time to deal with this because he needed to quickly find the 3 criminals who had taken his father somewhere. Lin warned that he had already reported everything to the teacher, but if help did not arrive in time, he would have to fight 3 strong attackers himself. No one knew where the cave in which the criminals hid led, because there was no end in sight. Then Yahello remembered the exam that was about to start, so the guy apologized to his friend for not being able to make it in time. But Luan wasn't as offended as his comrade, since Yahello had been preparing for it for several years, and Lin didn't really want to be a psionicist. Meanwhile, the exam was about to begin, and all the examinees were already ready. Then, Luan and Yahello's comrades began to worry that the boys were still missing, as they might be disqualified as soon as the gates closed. The main character's rival from the previous round also made it to the exam. He was unhappy that the 2 of them hadn't shown up, and the guy was planning to take revenge on them. East District Administration Head Wang Zi has already announced that there are only 10 minutes left before the start of the competition, so everyone is asked to review the rules again before the exam begins. Within 4 hours, all participants will need to reach the tower, which is located in the center of the park, where everyone was. The competition would be monitored by the Surveillance Department, the Security Department, and the Presidium. And when they were all ready, the final test began. The gates began to open, and all the examinees were already preparing for what they were about to go through. But the main character and his friend never showed up, causing their comrades to worry. The absence of the young men was noticed not only by their acquaintances, but also by Lily and her boss, who tried to find the teenagers in the crowd, but without success. But for the students, there was no time to think about the exam. First and foremost, they needed to hurry and save Father Yahello. Lin knew he would need glasses for the battle, so he ordered the 2 men to do some mischief somewhere to make them hate him. The protagonist told the others that they needed to pick up the pace, but first they needed to develop an action plan. And then they were interrupted by a man whom Luan had already seen at his friend's house when he noticed the tracks. The girl also recognized the attacker, saying that his name was Chi-Kui, and then added that he should let everyone through since she wanted to see her sister. Then the criminal said that Shudong was troublesome, and then added that when she got into trouble for this, she shouldn't blame him. Chi-Kui did not suspect any trick, and then the girl asked him where they were going, to which he replied that they were searching for treasure. Then Lin asked his friend why they had captured his father, and he explained that it was because the man was developing land ownership and therefore was familiar with the area, and the villain needed a guide to search for spiritual stones. But the guys knew that there were few spars in their city, so they didn't understand why the criminals decided to look for something here. And then Luan realized that the villains were heading to the park, because there were a lot of miracle drugs there that had been prepared for the examinees. Meanwhile, the exam was being strictly monitored, and everyone was watching the fact that only 10 minutes had passed, and already 2 had passed the first obstacles, which means that this year's participants are very strong. Yahello began to doubt his friend's words because the exam was heavily guarded, so going there for the sake of spars was like signing his own death warrant. Moreover, this year their mentors group is responsible for security, so achieving results will be almost impossible. And while the boys were talking about their teacher, unknown people in hoods came to him. These strangers turned out to be criminals who began attacking the group responsible for security. The psionics didn't have time to react, so the tower that all the participants were aiming for was damaged by the attackers' explosion. The hooded strangers did not stop at one department and went through the others, causing harm to people and the building. The stranger was asked where Commander Gu was, and he replied that the commander and his men had all already been defeated. Then the guards from the district security unit's assembly point tried to contact the people in the tower. The villain heard this and told the others to answer the guards and let them know that everything was under control, so there was nothing to worry about. And then the district chief reported that everything was fine and nothing unusual, so everyone should return to their positions. The attacker noted that the boss values his own personality much more than the lives of those participating in the test. Lily and her mentor realized that something was wrong, so the girl used her power of invisibility and quietly hid from the criminals. Meanwhile, the district chief asked the villains who they were and what they were going to do. And then the criminal asked if anyone remembered the incident when the city of Chao was destroyed 8 years ago. And in response to this, he received only silence. Then the villain decided to remind everyone. Before the incident, the Supernatural Power Association existed only in the eastern region, and not like now, with its branches scattered around the world. And then the city of Chao, a ghetto in the eastern region, was captured and then destroyed by the Thick Fog Group. 1,375 residents died in that event. And since the association was initially an unofficial organization, it was unable to arrive at the scene in time. The man rose from a pawn of the administration to become the head of the eastern region because his fiery speech ignited a fire in the hearts of the people, which led to the official recognition of the association, which soon grew into an industrial giant. However, the attacker doubted that everything in this story was clear. After this, the storyteller was informed that Lu Qin had arrived, so the man interrupted his reasoning about the story he had told. The commander gave the order for the scammers to begin, and they replied that they understood everything and would act in a coordinated manner. Then, Jiahao's father asked the villains if they could finally let him and his son go, since he had done as they wanted and brought them right under Shigong Park. At this moment, a third criminal approached the two criminals, bringing with him a crowd controlled by Luan, as well as himself and his friend. Jiahao was about to rush towards his father, but his comrade stopped him, as it was too early to reveal their plan. Meanwhile, Shuyu scolded her sister, because she had been given an order which she disobeyed. But at that moment, Lu said that it was even good that they came. Otherwise, he would have had to go a long way to replenish his energy reserves. And he suddenly grabbed one of Luan's slaves, and no one had time to do anything, because everything happened too unexpectedly. And then the man who was captured began to quickly dry up, turning into a mummy. Qin, meanwhile, threw the body away and then said that it was not enough for him, and he was still hungry. The swindler began to look around in search of a new victim, and then turned his attention to Jiahao's father, starting to reach out his hand towards him. And at that moment, Jiahao himself could not resist and struck the attacker, saving his father. The man was very surprised to see his son there, and he, in turn, apologized for helping only now. While his friend was busy with the dialogue, Lin ordered all his puppets not to wait, but to attack the opponents together. And at that moment, when the fight was just beginning, Luan ordered his friend and his father to quickly leave here, because at the moment, it was possible. But, as it turned out, Lu Qin was not upset by the fact that their loved ones had rebelled. The criminal simply began to absorb the energy of everyone who tried to fight him. Shuden also wanted to get involved in the fight, but her sister did not let her, not understanding what was happening to the girl. Luan realized that the scammers were targeting the exam taker's meeting place, so he had to immediately inform the people in the central tower. Meanwhile, the villains in the tower were told to take all the psionic reagent they needed. But the leader of the criminals replied that they didn't need the reagent at all, but all the examinees who were currently in the park. And then all the teenagers who were taking the exam saw a large number of rats and bats approaching them. The children were very surprised by this turn of events because they were not warned that animals from previous stages would also be in the final. There were so many mice and rats that the students couldn't even imagine how to fight them off. It turned out that the animal attack was the fault of the spirit of the beast of the primordial chaos. And because of this, all the participants were surrounded. Therefore, because of the rats and mice, the teenagers were forced to rush to the tower as quickly as possible to escape. Lily, meanwhile, was trying to call at least someone who could help her save her teacher and the others by stopping the attackers. The protagonist's comrades were also running away from the animals, and then the girl tripped over a stone and fell, so the mice and rats began to approach her. But the beasts were unable to catch up with the heroine because Fu Guangkun came to her aid, killing all the creatures that tried to attack the student. And then, the 4 examinees were left to be torn to pieces by the animals that surrounded them. The former rival shouted to the others to try to run away if they didn't want to die. And then a shadow cat appeared in the distance, and then a voice could be heard telling Vinogradinka to go forward. The cat approached the students and exploded with bright colors, frightening everyone around. It turned out that this cat was summoned by Lin Luan to save his comrades from the animals. Then the others began to question the protagonist, but he interrupted them, saying that now was not the time for chatter, because at the moment they needed to run. After this, Luan ordered everyone to escape through the underground passage that the criminals had used before. But now they were not there. And then Guangkun asked what to do about the exam. The student then explained to his opponent that the exam was not the most important thing to think about right now. At the same time, one of the examinees said that these were just mice and rats, so they would have to deal with them. But this guy had to fight not only with animals, but also with an attacker who used a technique called fire taste on the boy. The villain said that in a group, there would always be 1 or 2 people like this student who would take the initiative, making noise and causing trouble for others. And the way out of such a situation is very simple, because you just need to eliminate the initiators and then the rest will immediately scatter. Everyone really did start to panic right away, and the man shouted after them that the students wouldn't run away from him. Meanwhile, the tower guards stood motionless, not moving from their places, as they had been ordered by their superior. Meanwhile, Lily tried to explain to the men that they had an emergency, because the tower had been taken over by criminals. The villain's plan worked, and all the examinees ran to the tower in hopes of salvation, which in the end did not happen. Then, one of the attackers reported to his commander that all the students were assembled. The leader replied that he understood everything, and then added that after 8 years he would finally be able to make the case public. After this, the man turned to the administrative workers and said that they should know the other side of the fall of the city of Chao. The perpetrator said that on that occasion she arrived late to the association on purpose, in order to provoke the public and obtain the necessary status. The association's acquired power cost the lives of 1,375 Chao residents. The criminal said that he wanted to pull out the weed, meaning association, by the roots, and the examinees were chosen by him as revolutionaries. Then Lily's mentor wondered what this psycho wanted to do with the children. Lu Qian asked his commander if they could finally begin their plan. And then it seemed to all the students that some kind of earthquake had begun, because the ground began to move out from under their feet. But it turned out that it was not an earthquake, but a large monster that emerged from underground. It was a worm called a crown gear, and it was so huge that it swept away many of the students. The criminal then asked the others if they were familiar with this type of worm, which required a lot of effort to fatten up. This monster releases a mist-like strand that, when inhaled, produces a stupefying effect that, while not effective against psionics, is suitable for beginners. Then Lily's mentor began to scold the criminal, asking if he realized what he was going to do to ordinary children. After this, the man added that the military unit already knows what is going on in the tower, so it would be better for the villains to simply leave and let the children go. But the attacker was not so simple because he noticed that Lily had left, and he calmly let her go because help would not arrive in time anyway. The criminal understood that by the time the rescue team arrived, the villains would already be able to do their job. After this, the worm was ordered to begin, and it began to do everything as the criminal had described earlier. The students inhaled this fog and did not understand what it was and what was happening to them. And then the criminal noticed that the monster had stopped, and he couldn't understand why this had happened, because the worm had eaten enough of the reagent to give it a lot of strength. The students also began to notice that the fog had stopped appearing, and it also seemed as if the monster was in pain. And then the worm said that he couldn't take it anymore, because it was so disgusting here. It turned out that even the criminals themselves did not know that this worm could talk, because they were very surprised by this fact. Then the worm started screaming that he wanted to get out, and then he screamed something about a fierce claw. Half an hour before this, the main character and his comrades were running away from criminals and trying to reach the exit, where they would be safe. Here the heroes began to think about what would happen to the other examinees, and this thought made Luan stop. After this, the guy said that he had a strong call of nature and ran away, promising to return. The others tried to call the teenager to stop, but to no avail. Then the friend of the runaway boy said that the boy knew what he was doing, so he could go. The student understood that he currently had few points, so it would be difficult for him to beat anyone, so he needed to quickly earn more. The teenager's subordinates did everything possible to make themselves hated because they behaved terribly in public, telling the endings of films and pretending to be exhibitionists. And then the young man began to feel waves of spiritual power, realizing that they were from the reagents prepared by the Association for the Examinees. So he decided to find the warehouse, which should be somewhere nearby. Then the boy noticed a large worm crawling out of the ground, something the student certainly didn't expect to see. The teenager didn't understand where this disgusting worm came from in the park, because he had never seen anything like it before. But the guy thought that this worm did not pose any threat and looked quite friendly. But it was not to be, because this monster suddenly opened its mouth, showing the boy that it clearly posed a threat. After this, the monster soared upward, wanting to attack the young man, jumping on him. But the worm didn't manage to eat the student because he reacted in time and dodged. And while Lin was thinking about how the worm obviously belonged to the villains and why it was so big, the monster itself disappeared somewhere. And then it dawned on the teenager that the worm had not disappeared, but had gone underground. But the boy realized this too late, because the creature was already underneath him with its mouth open. Just as the boy had time to think that he was finished, the monster's mouth slammed shut and he was eaten. So Luan found himself inside the worm, but he remained alive, because among the abilities he copied was a defensive one. But he didn't know how long he could hold out like that. The student decided to gut him with an ability called Fierce Claw. But then the boy decided that if this monster belonged to the criminals, then he could wait in the belly until the worm itself delivered Luan to the villains. Although the plan was good, the main character had to endure a place that was disgusting for him to be in. Then the guy felt that the worm was crawling somewhere, and then he heard the voices of other guys. That's when the boy decided it was time to activate the Fierce Claw and kill the monster from the inside. Thus, the main character killed the monster that could harm a large number of children. As soon as Lin finally got out of the worm, he began to curse at the war that was going on here, and then said what an abomination this worm was. The main criminal ordered the others to grab the guy who had ruined all their plans. Meanwhile, Lukin ran to treat the worm, calling it by the name Lady Huel. Meanwhile, Shuyu turned into a beast, screaming that she would not allow some boy to interfere with them. However, the girl was interrupted by her sister, forcing her to stop to protect Luan. And since no one was going to catch the boy, it had to be done by the man, who was not happy about this, because it was too much of a hassle for him. Meanwhile, the leader of the criminals asked how much time it would take to completely cure the monster. Then Luchin replied that it would take him about 10 minutes, which did not please his boss at all, because the main attacker understood that they hardly had these 10 minutes, since other psionics would soon come running to the guy's aid. And so the man ordered his subordinates to try to delay the approaching warriors as long as possible in order to gain time. Meanwhile, Lily's mentor looked at Luan, thinking that he had noticed this young man a long time ago. Meanwhile, Lin saw a villain who controlled fire, and the teenager decided that this attacker was currently the biggest danger to him. Then someone called the boy's name, which made Luan feel surprised because he couldn't understand whose voice it was. The man then introduced himself as Lily's mentor and explained to the boy that his ability would help them communicate telepathically. The mentor told the boy that help would arrive in 15 minutes, and in the meantime, Lin would have to try to detain the attackers. The protagonist said that he would definitely cope with this task because a lot depended on it. Meanwhile, the villain couldn't keep up with Luan, thinking that the guy was running like a cheetah. The attacker then attempted to attack the teenager with a wave of fire that was large enough to reach the boy. And although Lin managed to dodge, the man's flame flares up and goes out at his will, so it will be difficult for the student to escape from the fire that surrounds him. And then, the young man began to say that he was still a complete newbie, an ordinary student, so the man needed to be easier on him. But the villain didn't really care about the guy's words, so he used an ability called Heatwave on him. However, the teenager didn't even have to dodge because he used a block and a protective field. Thanks to the abilities that Lin had copied earlier, he could now give at least some resistance to the intruders. But even with the combined use of both forces, the young man was unable to withstand the criminal's blow. The boy understood that if his opponent struck in all seriousness, he would not be able to withstand it, and Luan did not have enough points to bite. The guy avoided the blows as best he could because he understood that if anything happened, it would be very painful for him. And then a cat named Strelka exploded behind the attacker, which turned out to be an unexpected move for him. And then the boss told the villain not to stay long because the teenager was deliberately stalling for time. And while the man was dealing with the leader, Luan was able to disappear from sight, which caused even more trouble for the criminal. The attacker thought the guy was trying to hide up there, so he attacked the trees. However, it was not a student there, but another shadow cat, from which the noise was coming. And while the man was distracted by the cat, Luan decided to strike him from behind while he still had the opportunity. Finally, the young man made it clear to the attacker that he intended not only to stall for time, but also to overcome the criminal. But, unfortunately, the teenager's blow was not enough to defeat the villain, so the attacker then pushed the boy away from himself. And then Lin heard the voice of his mentor, who said that it was too early to think about victory, because now it was much more important to win time, and then victory would definitely remain with the heroes. And although the teenager understood this, he still wanted to defeat the villain, noticing that he needed less and less points to bite. The student realized that the number of points required to capture an enemy is determined by the enemy's vitality, and therefore it can decrease if the vitality drops. The young man understood that if he lowered the attacker's points a little more, then he would be able to use the power of capture on him. The mentor noticed the hero's tenacity, which would allow him to gain even more time than expected. And while Luan was trying to stall for time, Lu Qin was able to completely cure the worm, which was already ready to continue. Shillelagh and the other operatives were already rushing to help. However, they met someone on their way. It was the detachment of those who attacked the building. They blocked the path of our fighters. One of the unknown hooded men, apparently the leader of the squad, told Lily that entry was prohibited. Meanwhile, the examinees looked up and one of them shouted in panic that the worm had recovered. The guy controlling the worm laughed and said that it happened because he was not paying attention. But it would not happen again because he would guard the worm, and in 5 minutes they would all be under his control. The old man heard this speech and lowered his eyes, realizing that they were too late. Meanwhile, Luan continued to fight. He fell to the ground, burned from the previous attack. At this moment, Lu Qin raised his head to the sky and commanded the worm to begin its attack. However, nothing happened, and the worm began to make strange sounds similar to the sounds of pain. Lu Qin approached and saw a strange silhouette in his pet's belly. He realized that there was someone there. Luan shouted that the time had come and ordered Griffin to explode. At that moment, the shadow kitten in the worm's body exploded, and the monster's belly flew apart, creating a huge hole. Lu Qin was furious because he had just cured his pet. Yang Mu chuckled as he watched this. The old man called the guy a genius because Luan had managed to leave an assistant in the worm back then. The red-haired guy could hardly stand on his feet, but he was glad that everything went exactly according to plan. Zhao Chenlin smiled as she watched the fight, because the guy was not bad after all. Meanwhile, the unknown leader of the attackers was furious that their plans were being thwarted. The fight continued. Luan was getting hit in the face more and more by his opponent. The man smiled because he understood that he was winning the fight. He advised the kid to surrender because he was no match for him. And Luan stuck to his tactics. He looked at the system window where it was written that 1,100 points were needed for the capture, and now he had 1,104. The time had come. The hero suddenly stood up and thunder rumbled around him. Luan activated Shadow Step at full power. At that very moment, he ran at the speed of sound towards the enemy, who was confident of his victory. Another attack, not typical of his opponent, was directed towards Luan. The hero managed to stop in time and dodge her. An unknown person in a green cloak appeared in the air. The passionate guy immediately recognized him and said that he would sort this out himself. However, the unknown person did not answer a word. He then looked towards Luan and said in a rage that he had no idea how much he had ruined their plans. Luan raised his head and asked the stranger to stop. He asked Teacher Gu to stop, Yunxiao. At that moment, the stranger's eyes opened wide. He did not expect such an answer. Luan continued. He said that he didn't tell Hao and the others that the killer was their teacher, because right now they are going through a very difficult time, and they wouldn't be able to stand it if they heard this truth. The man's hands were shaking. He told the boy that he didn't understand what he was talking about, and he didn't know who this Gu was. Yunxiao. Luan shouted that he himself did not want to admit it, but all the threads lead to this, no matter how much he did not want to. Firstly, the teacher had come specifically to their school 2 months in advance, even though there were few of them there, which was too lenient for a person of his level, and all because it was decided to hold the exam near Venqing. Afterwards, Lu Qin and the other criminals kidnapped Hao's father, knowing exactly when he was off duty, and entered the exam site unhindered, indicating that their accomplice was already there. When Luan discovered them, he first alerted the teacher. But the night passed and reinforcements still hadn't arrived. The rats and mice that were part of the second round were brought under control, and they began to surround the examinees at precisely the right time. And finally, the tower was captured, the communication routes were blocked, and only one man could have pulled it all off with such ease. Only the commander of the security detachment, Gu, could do this, Yunxiao, Luan's teacher. After listening to the story, the man smiled and replied that this was a very excellent chain of conclusions, but the guy was wrong. After all, Gu Yunxiao is dead. An unknown man personally strangled him with his own hands. Luan just looked pitifully at the man who was trying to hide the truth. The guy ordered Lael to show up. At that moment, a cute black cat appeared from the chest of the hooded stranger. The cat jumped out and ran to Luan's feet, and the boy simply watched it. There was no point in hiding it anymore. The stranger couldn't believe that he had been found out. He took off his hood and Gu appeared in front of the guy, Yunjiao. He asked how long Luan had suspected him. Meanwhile, a battle was breaking out outside the exam venue, and one of the support squad decided to use his hurricane ability. At that very moment, powerful gusts of wind struck the unknown. A strong gust of wind blew their hoods off, and Lily recognized them. It was the 6th group of association investigators, Gu Squad Yunxiao. Lily started screaming and asking what they were doing here. Were they crazy? But the girl from the 6th group shouted that the entire association should die for what happened to Chao. Meanwhile, Luan asked his teacher to stop before it was too late. His teacher replied that the boy knew nothing and that they were only here to do justice. That day in Chao, each of them had lost their relatives. At that moment, an unknown girl flashed through the mentor's memories. He began to concentrate his power and said that he had been training for 8 years to kill those responsible for what happened, who were blissfully unpunished. And that is why today they must take revenge on the association. We are transported back in time to an old, dilapidated barracks, where a female voice asked the children if their test results had arrived. Little Yunxiao boasted that he had excellent grades in all subjects except physical training, but even that could be improved with a reagent, as his teacher had told him. The children's mother was happy for her son and asked his sister how her results were. The girl puffed out her cheeks and replied that she had lost her certificate. The brother immediately shamed his sister, saying that she had terrible grades there, and that was why she had lost her certificate, to which the sister replied that in any case, she would remain his older sister for 2 whole minutes. The brother and sister were twins, and at that very moment, they began to fight to find out who was older, but their mother calmed them down. Yunming's mother told her that if her brother continued like this, there was a high chance he would be accepted into the psionic ranks. The only problem was his physical abilities, which he could improve with a reagent, but it was very expensive. Their father had abandoned them long ago, and their mother was afraid she wouldn't be able to cope. The girl smiled and replied that she would drop out of school, since her grades were low anyway and her education was a waste of money. She would get a job and help her brother get into the school for psionicists. This is what happened. The little girl worked at different jobs, she cleaned up the trash, and in the evening her brother asked what she was doing that it smelled so bad. At one of her jobs, she washed dishes at night, and in the morning she cooked breakfast for her brother, who told her that he was in a hurry, but the girl overslept again. In her 3rd job, she worked as a courier and delivered an order in the pouring rain, and her brother later woke her up, telling her that she was lazy and it was time for her to get up. The poor girl was absolutely exhausted, but she knew what she was trying for. And one fine day, Yunxiao burst into their house with the words that he had been accepted into the psionic specialty. The boy was very happy, and his mother praised him for being a good boy. The brother leaned towards his sister and said that now she should understand who is better. Yunming replied that it was only because she did not go to the exam. Yunxiao confirmed her words and said that she would simply be wasting her time if she went there. The girl just looked at her brother silently and didn't know what to answer, keeping her hand in her pocket. The boy's uncle came into the family's house and asked if the boy had really passed the exam. Mother confirmed that this was true, and they began to celebrate. Everyone around said that Xiao would become the strongest psionic. The boy was a little embarrassed, but he was sincerely happy that everyone around him was praising him, and that he was the best. His older sister watched everyone rejoice for her brother and clutched something in her hand. Some leaflet that once seemed very important. After some time, the city of Chao was destroyed. A tearful Xiao screamed the name of his sister and mother, trying to find them under the rubble. He shouted their names with increasing fury and tried with all his might to clear away the collapsed house. At that moment, a bloody body appeared from under the rubble. It was his older sister Min. Xiao shouted his sister's name and tried harder to pull her out from under the rubble. But suddenly, with his tear-stained eyes, the boy noticed a strange piece of paper that his dead sister was clutching. The unfortunate guy pulled it out of Min's hands to look. What he saw, he could not imagine. He remembered his sister's words, who said that she had lost her certificate and that she would drop out of school and help her brother with admission to the School of Psionics. And he also remembered that he said that this was the right decision because she would have wasted her time. In Min's hand was her certificate, which showed that she had the highest score in all subjects. She burst into tears. Only now did he understand what his sister had done for him. She sacrificed her future for the sake of her beloved younger brother, who now sits next to her corpse. 2 years after joining the association, Xiao stumbled upon the truth about what happened in Chao by chance. There was only one note, that an incident had been discovered in Chao, and instructions to do nothing for the time being. That is why now he will make every resident whose hands are stained with the blood of Chao pay for their actions. It is time to eradicate the association. Luan shouted to the teacher that he had once said that he wanted to change the association for the better. However, his hatred-filled teacher had already raised his brush to summon an ink cell. At that very second, drops of magic ink fell near the boy and the cat. Suddenly, the spots rushed upward and formed a dense cage that held the hero back. Xiao ordered Luan to sit here and not try to disturb him. The teacher turned around and ordered Chi Kui to help the other troops deal with the reinforcements and buy them time. However, the fiery brute first wanted to deal with the guy who ran like a beast and was now immobilized. An enraged Xiao turned around and reminded him what he had told him to do. Chi Kui was frightened by the leader's gaze and replied that he understood the order. Luan tried to break the cage, but he soon realized that he couldn't overcome it at the moment. However, suddenly someone appeared next to him. The guy raised his gaze to see who it was. It was an enraged Zhao Shuyu who wanted to kill the guy for what he did to her sister. At that moment, Luan realized that he was finished. At the same time, the battle that took place outside the exams had already dragged on and everyone was tired. The blonde man from the defense squad ordered his opponents to surrender. After they saw that the guys were exhausted and rushed forward, the blonde ordered his subordinates to surround the tower and save the examinees. However, suddenly he heard something and strange spots appeared in the sky. In an instant, they were hit by blows of paint that were so sharp that they pierced the ground. In the sky before them, there he was. The blonde recognized this man. It was Gu Yunxiao. He warned his soldiers about the danger and advised them to be 120% attentive. After all, their enemy is not just a soldier, but a legendary fighter nicknamed the Beautiful Penguin. At that very moment, the enraged Xiao uses one of his abilities, Buddha's Penguin. Meanwhile, Luan begged the girl to understand him correctly. Because he did not do anything to Qingni, they are decent people. However, the enraged girl did not listen to him. She said that the guy was very talkative, but unfortunately it would not help him. Suddenly, her sister appeared behind her and shouted at Shuyu not to touch him. She raised her hand to her throat and threatened that if she killed the guy, she would say goodbye to life. The girl burst into tears and shouted that the problem was that she belonged to Luan. The sister didn't expect to hear these words, and Luan was shocked. Shuyu became even more furious and shouted that this was definitely the end for the guy. Meanwhile, Xiao finished the fight and the Buddha projection disappeared. The entire team that was moving to help the students was bound by the power of the leader of the uprising. The blonde man raised his head with difficulty and said that Beautiful Penguin was very much mistaken. The boy turned around and replied that he would spare his life so that he could see the beginning of the changes with his own eyes. He contacted Lutzi and asked how their worm was. The guy replied that everything was fine, and this time everything would work. At that moment, the worm sprayed poisonous clouds and all the examinees fell into a strange sleep, as if they were under control. An old man watched all this from a safe distance. He couldn't believe that all they could do was watch as the students were taken under control. At times like these, Yang Mu hated himself for not being able to fight anymore. The old man turned to the girl and said that now only her clone was here, who could exchange information with others so that they could call for help. The girl replied to the sage that she had already done everything. But the problem was that due to recent events, a large number of squads had gone on missions, and besides, Xiao had scattered smoke bombs everywhere. In short, the only possible reinforcements now were the Red Shell Detachment. She asked the old man if he thought it would be a good thing or a bad thing if they came here. The old man just bowed his head and said nothing. Meanwhile, Xiao ordered preparations to lift the siege when he heard that the examinees had been taken under control. The old man considered the decision regarding the red shell. There is still a chance to save and restore the students. But if they are taken away, then there is nothing that can be done for them, so even if there are casualties, it is still better than being completely defeated. Chenlin smiled sweetly and replied that she had already made a request for their transfer and they should arrive any minute. A red glow suddenly appeared over the battlefield. Xiao turned around, feeling a strange pressure. Meanwhile, Shuyu swung at Luan in anger. However, she did not strike him, but attacked the bars of the cage around the guy, which began to disperse. At that moment, the girl grabbed the hero by the shirt and pulled him towards her. She told Luan that if he let Qingni down, she would bite his throat. In any authorized organization, a critical moment can arise that can lead to a clash, and it is precisely at such times that the need for a secret weapon arises, and the red armor was precisely such a weapon for the association, which exists not for the sake of fighting for justice, but with a specific purpose, and now their goal is to defeat 12 criminals. One of the Red Warriors said that the boys had examinees as hostages, and he wanted to know what they should do with them, to which the commander replied that he did not know about any examinees. Xiao looked up and heard an order to attack from unknown enemies. These were the red troops that hung in the air in front of the rebels. The blue-haired girl shouted to the commander that they could fight them together. However, the commander did not listen to her, and in an instant his hand appeared in front of them. A rift appeared in front of the squad, and they did not understand why the captain had shielded his squad from himself. She replied that their goal was to take the examinees away and then fight the association, not right now. So his squad should take the students away along the planned route. In the meantime, he will delay the association. The commander of the Red Warriors asked the boy if this was his final choice. Suddenly, Chikui appeared and tried to attack the red shell and burn them all to ashes. But the ardent guy was intercepted by the huge hand of the Buddha commander. He threw it at the squad and shouted that they had to leave. That was an order. The Red Warrior said that Xiao was worthy of being a commander, and he would be a good opponent. If he hadn't helped Chikui, he would have already been dead because this battle was beyond his abilities. The desperate rebel commander grinned and asked if it was too presumptuous to say so. After all, their battle is rather beyond the capabilities of the red shell. A huge blue spirit appeared before the red squad, emanating from the boy's body. Luan also noticed a huge projection of the teacher Buddha. The guy remembered that he had a connection with the old man and asked if he was still here. The old man confirmed the hero's words, to which the boy asked whether his teacher was a good or a bad person. Yang Mu thought about it. It was a difficult question because everyone had their own reasons for doing one thing or another, and he didn't want to judge Xiao's choice. So he decided to tell Luan Xiao's whole story so that he could draw his own conclusion. Once upon a time, there was a boy driven by a sense of justice and talent. Everyone believed he was capable of becoming a hero, and if he had a flaw, it was rooted in his very birth. After all, this boy was born surrounded by poverty. The Buddha projection struck first, trying to reach the enemy with his huge staff. The commander said that the charming Panguan was a worthy opponent and had amazing skills, but his only weakness was the range of his attacks. After these words, he ordered the first unit to surround the guy. The Red Warriors pointed their hands towards Xiao, and a strange chain shot out from them. A chain with hundreds of knives from different directions flew towards the rebel commander at great speed. At that moment, chains as sharp as rose thorns grabbed Xiao and immobilized him. The Red Armor commander said that they would now tear him to pieces. The rebel raised his head and replied that he could not dream of it. The guy, through the pain, raised his hands into the air and began to spin the spear. At that moment, his colossal projection exactly repeated the movements of its creator. After that, Xiao struck the ground, and his projection did the same, creating a destructive wave. Some of the Red Warriors could not withstand the force of the blow and were thrown back. The commander of the Red Shells shouted that while Xiao was attacking, he was vulnerable and that he needed to be attacked right now. The second unit didn't wait, and immediately began attacking the guy with the Hammer of Heaven skill. Xiao raised his hands up and tried to defend himself from them. At this moment, he only wanted Lu Qin to quickly take the disciples away. Meanwhile, the group of students under control were leaving in an unknown direction. The commander ordered his soldiers not to stop and to wear down the enemy. Shi Lily was watching all this and was confused as to why Gu Yunxiao protects the others while the Red Army attacks him to the death. At this time, Luan was already rushing to help. He said that his mother told him about the destruction of the city of Chao. Meanwhile, the teacher's strength was already running out. The commander noticed that Buddha was weakened. Now was the best moment to attack. But suddenly, shadows of different people appeared in front of Xiao. It was his squad that came to the rescue. They decided to defend the commander to the last. Xiu shouted at the top of his lungs that he ordered them to leave. But the boys disobeyed and rushed into the attack. One of them said that if it weren't for Xiao's leadership, there would be no point in their rebellion. and they swore on their lives to be with him until the end. The Red Warrior just laughed at this, because after the battle they had no supernatural power left. Two squads clashed with each other, the Red Shell and the Gu Squad Yunxiao. They remembered the commander's words that their goal was to take the examinees away, because the enemies were very strong psionics of the association, and there was no need to oppose them and die. But it was too late. At that very second, the entire rebel detachment was brutally killed. The wounded Xiao screamed at the top of his lungs for them to run away. Sharp thorns pierced the blue-haired girl's chest. At that moment, the red chain of death cut her in half right in front of Xiao's face. The commander's eyes filled with tears. All the people who were with him until the end and believed in him were killed by the association again. The commander of the Red Warriors was surprised that the guy still had strength. He felt that the atmosphere had become more dangerous. Xiao's rage knew no bounds. All his rage began to take physical form. He screamed and cried at the top of his voice, and from this shock a new version of Buddha was born. Xiao looked into the eyes of his enemies and shouted that he would kill them all. Suddenly, someone called him, calling him commander. Xiao was surprised and turned around. It was Lu Qin, one of his troop who was leading the disciples away. Xiao couldn't understand what he was doing here, because he should be with the students now. The Red Warrior ordered to begin. At that very second, the guy's hand, in the center of which was a huge mouth, reached out to Xiao. The guy pierced the white-haired rebel's body through and through. The pale killer looked up and, smiling, asked his former commander for forgiveness. The moment he pulled his hand out of Xiao's body, Luan and Qingni came running. The hero was shocked by the picture he saw. The traitor's hand began to gradually suck the energy out of Xiao's body. The hidden boy smiled and told the commander that it was all over now. Xiao, who was coughing up blood but was still conscious, couldn't believe that he had been betrayed. Lu Qin jumped away from the rebel, but Xiao was still standing even with such a severe wound. The guy in the hood said that he waited until the commander had no strength left, since his ability is not so good at recovery. One of the Red Warriors asked if this guy was a traitor, to which the other Red Warrior replied that he was not. He was originally their man. Lu Qin unbuttoned his jacket and pulled out a red badge that looked like a shield. Xiao immediately recognized him. It was a sign of association. Now he realized that Qin was one of them. Since everything was revealed, the guy decided to introduce himself. He is a spy for the secret department of the Red Army. He was assigned to Commander Xiao 2 years ago. The association immediately realized that something was wrong with Xiao, a native of Chao City. He was talented, extremely stubborn, and had a strong sense of justice. Such a person could not simply be allowed to occupy a high position without insurance. Then they discovered 2 years ago that he and the 6th Squad were plotting something against them, but they did not dare to stop them immediately due to a lack of evidence. After all, they were extremely cautious and also very capable guys. It would have been extremely wasteful not to take advantage of their talents. After hearing the whole story, Xiao rushed to attack Lu Qinya. The guy only regretted that until today they had helped them very well. He then gave the order to the Red Warriors to finish them all off. While Xiao was fighting the warriors, Qin thanked him for treating him well, and thanks to the commander, the boy became stronger and grew in his abilities. He smiled darkly and inhumanly, saying that Xiao was an ideal commander. Exhausted and wounded, Xiao continued to fight off the enemies alone in every possible way. It seemed that he was holding on only by his unbending strength of spirit. Qin said that he could still take all those students whom Xiao had planned to take with him to raise as rebels. After all, his department in the Red Army needs spies, but the whole world will only know that the criminal Gu Yunxiao and his squad kidnapped them. The traitor's words irritated the former commander more and more. He used his internal energy and pushed back all the Red Warriors. After that, bleeding profusely, he rushed towards Lu Qinya. However, the pale guy easily repelled the attack, piercing the rebel's chest. After all, in his current state, Xiao cannot resort to the face of Buddha, but his disciple is full of strength. Blood began to stream from the man's mouth. Qin said that it was time to die and threw Xiao away. The fighter for justice crashed into the trees and then fell to the ground without any strength. Luan shouted the teacher's name when he saw him land. He, the cat, and the girl ran up to the dying Xiao. Luan couldn't believe what happened because his teacher was such a strong fighter. Someone in the distance ordered to finish off the rebel. Luan raised his head and realized that these were the Red Warriors who were approaching. He looked at his teacher again and told him to be patient for a little while, and the boy would figure out how to heal his wounds. Suddenly, Xiao began to speak slowly. He asked himself in a whisper whether he was right. Tears appeared in the teacher's eyes and he asked if he had killed them all. His entire squad, which was loyal to him. Xiao realized that he remained a simple fool until the very end. Drowning in tears, he told Luan that he repented. Qingni shouted that the troops were coming, and Luan told the teacher that he did not approve of his actions, but he was also disgusted by what the association had done. He remembered how the teacher looked when he said that if their world was not perfect enough, then he would do everything in his power to change it. One of the red soldiers noticed the children and the rebel. Luan said that he would help him finish what he started and walk his path in his stead. The red warrior looked at Luan and asked who he was. Luan just looked at his sign, which said that the enemy could be captured, and he bit. The boy got up from his knees and asked the girl to find a way to cure the teacher. The warriors realized that this guy was a student, but he heard their conversation, so he needed to be eliminated. At this moment, the system reported that the copying was complete. Buddha Penguin, maximum level. Luan's hair began to turn from red to ash. Then, when they became completely ashen like Xiao's, he said that instead of the teacher, he would turn the association upside down. The red warrior looked at the guy and did not understand what was happening. At the place where Luan stood, a red explosion of unprecedented power instantly formed. Luqian was leaving with his red friends. He heard something strange and turned around. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. In front of him stood the red Buddha of Penguin. He couldn't believe that Xiao was still alive. Luan took the first step towards his enemies. The pale boy panicked and ordered his red warriors to capture and destroy him, and our hero, who looked like Xiao, was rushing towards Lu. Qinya. Luan shouted that his teacher was kind and left them alive, but he would spare no one. The Buddha's projection summoned its staff to attack. He then struck the ground, a huge red energy of pure rage piercing the earth and destroying everyone within the radius. Luqian watched as his soldiers died one by one, and something red rushed straight towards him. He didn't have time to react before Luan's fist flew into his face. The force of the impact was so great that the guy rolled several meters before stopping. His face was smashed to pieces and his nose was broken. One of his subordinates sat down next to him and asked if he was okay. Without answering Comrade Qin, he grabbed him with his hand. The warrior did not understand what was happening, and all the life energy gradually left his body and passed to the guy. A couple of seconds later, the warrior was lying on the ground and Qin stood up. He realized that it was not Xiao but that nasty boy. But where he got the ability of Buddha's face remains to be seen. But he didn't have time to find out, because Luan was already in front of him. The fast guy hit the traitor right in the face again. However, Qin was not so simple and managed to grab it with his hand. He told Luan that he was not as strong as his teacher, and his ability to suck was much stronger than the guy's. Luan's strength gradually began to flow to Qin, who laughed loudly. But the hero had an ace up his sleeve. He turned his hand into sharp claws. At that moment, he cut off Qin's hand. The villain began to scream at the top of his lungs as his most powerful weapon was cut off with one swing. Lu repeatedly with his claws, Qinyu. The traitor's body was cut like butter, and more wounds appeared on it. He called the only thing that could save him now, his worm. The huge carnivorous worm heard its owner and was already rushing towards his call. It was amazing how such a giant had covered such a distance in such a short time, but it was already standing behind Luan. Bleeding, Lu Qin ordered the worm to kill the boy. The animal obeyed and at that very second released its sticky saliva at the hero. The saliva hit his back and, like a spider web, prevented the guy from moving, while the wounded Lu Qin tried to take advantage of the situation. Luan became angry and turned his hand into a claw and told the worm not to even think about trying to take away his power. After these words, the guy jumped on the enemy and struck him in the stomach. Luan was supposed to cut the worm, but nothing happened because he had been saturated with the ability to heal wounds, and now his regeneration had increased several times. The worm decided to counterattack and spat its saliva at the hero again. Luan liked strong ropes, and the boy realized that it was more difficult to cope with a spiritual animal of such a size than he had expected. Meanwhile, the wounded Qin, without one arm, ran further and further into the forest and was glad that the worm had detained his opponent. Luan also understood this. He knew that fighting with an animal was not a very good option, because then the narrow-eyed guy would leave. He watched as his enemy moved further and further away. He needed to come up with something urgently. Suddenly, new allies, Chini and Lala, appeared before the hero. It was very opportune. The guy was very happy about the appearance of the duet. Chini stood in a welcoming pose and said that the cat heroine and her pet were already here. Lala confirmed her words with a loud meow. Help is of course good, but Luanya was interested in what happened to the teacher. Ginny said that she and the cat were not doctors and that someone else would take care of him. She remembered Shi Lily, who said that she would take care of the teacher and they should go help Luan. The girl said that they would deal with this worm and the guy should catch up with that squinting guy, but Luan doubted that they could handle it. Two furious cats looked at the guy aggressively. Zinni Wool stood on end and she said that no mortal dares to doubt the cat heroine and her favorite. Luan realized that it was better not to argue with the girl and wish them luck. Then he ran as fast as he could towards the unfinished enemy. The girl and the cat were left alone with the worm, and Zinni was glad that she would finally be able to show herself in action. The worm did not attack, but looked at the strange cats, to which Tinny said that it was clear that he was timid. After these words, the worm opened its hellish mouth and spat its saliva into them. The ferocious cat and her companion were instantly covered in sticky slime. However, this did not upset Chinny. She told Lala not to be afraid because she would take care of everything. Suddenly, the girl heard a loud, furious meow, and Chinny immediately looked around. It wasn't little Lala standing next to her, but a furious, huge red beast. And Chinny was shocked. The battle began. The worm attacked first and decided to tie up our girls. But Lala was able to deftly dodge the dangerous projectiles. Then the furious cat took advantage of the moment and attacked the monster with its claws. The cut ran straight across the worm's body. She did better than Luan, and the monster's body began to tear apart at the cut. However, the worm did not stay aside and managed to grab Lala with its threads. At that moment, the threads became covered in blue light. The worm sent electricity through its saliva to hit Lala. However, Chinny did not stand aside and jumped towards the cat, ordering the worm to leave her pet behind. Chinny slashed at the worm's threads with her hand, but to her surprise, it did no damage to them. The girl pretended that this was the plan and said that it was just a diversionary tactic. Now comes the real attack. After these words, she sent her ghostly spirits in the form of cats to the worm's head. The ghost cats immediately struck the monster by exploding. Lala was saved from the monster. Chinny told her that this worm has rough, thick skin and it will be difficult to cope with it, so Lala needs to do something about it quickly. The fog from the explosion cleared and the worm immediately attacked the girl, not letting her finish. The monster sank into the ground and everything around began to shake, but our heroes miraculously managed to dodge. Lala stood up and immediately began to form a strange ball with her mouth. Immediately, the ball became bigger, and the cat fired a bomb at the annoying worm. Lala was pleased with herself. She knew that no one could survive something like that. The worm's huge body was covered with numerous wounds. Chinny was already overjoyed at her victory. She praised the cat and said that she was worthy of being called her pet. The worm's body split into several pieces and now it looked like sliced sausage. But victory was still far away because each part of the body began to turn into a separate small worm. The worms released smoke and the girl became angry at the monster's tenacity. Cinny covered her nose. She realized that this was the same smoke that was used on the students, and she did not want to become feeble-minded. Meanwhile, Luan used Shadow Step at full power and was already catching up with his opponent. He quickly caught up with the cripple and happily jumped on top of him. The moment he found himself above the squinting boy's head, Luan activated Buddha's face, and the huge red projection struck the traitor with its weapon. The force of the blow was colossal. Lu Qin immediately lost an arm and a leg. He couldn't escape anymore and began to beg for mercy. He said that the main villain here is Gu Yunqiao. He is on the side of justice because he is a secret agent. The traitor began to cry. He told Luan to go and look for Xiao to kill and not him. Suddenly, Qin heard a meowing sound next to him. It was a purple ghost cat. After a cute meow, the cat exploded right next to the guy's face. Qin screamed. His face was disfigured, and he cursed Luan with all sorts of words. He just looked at the pathetic traitor and then replied that the guy had no right to judge the teacher. After all, his entire family died, and in his place, Luan would not have remained sober for so many years. The association is not the direct culprit, but it is connected to what happened. The teacher captured the students only to tell them what the association really is, and not to harm. He remained decent until the very end, unlike Lu. Chinya, after all, used the teacher and his comrades, seeking benefits and considering himself right. But the most disgusting thing about this guy is that he squints. After these words, Luan attacked Lu Qin with many cats, making him look like a scarecrow. Luan's last sentence, it seemed to him that he was just looking for an excuse to beat him up. Luan replied that he planned to maim him half to death to give him time to think about his behavior. But Lu Qin simply laughed at this, because his ability makes him immortal. But the hero's strength is already running out. After this, the traitor opened his mouth wide and ordered everyone to come to him. At that very moment, hundreds of examinees approached the battlefield under supervision. Luan watched as they surrounded him, having completely forgotten about them. Lu Qin laughed. He said that there were several hundred disciples here. Would the red-haired guy have the courage to kill them all? At that very moment, one of the students thoughtlessly attacked Luan, but he easily dodged. The zombie students continued to run after the guy, but he was fast and easily escaped due to his shadow steps. The traitor said that he and Xiao were very similar. They were both merciful and could not harm the innocent, which is why Luan would become the cause of his own defeat. But the guy didn't lose heart. He replied that since they couldn't be killed, they could simply be knocked out. After this, the hero began to hit the students so that they lost consciousness but did not cause fatal damage. After a few minutes, Luan began to get tired. He understood that these were the strongest guys among the applicants, and he did not expect that it would be so difficult. Now he has 1,000 points. Each one will require 20, and we must not forget about the main enemy. Meanwhile, his opponent stood up in the middle of the crowd and shouted that he was forced to admit that people like Luan were born once every decade, and that he was the strongest among all the examinees in the country. But if he thinks that this is enough to resist the association, then he is a fool and a madman. Today, the association has strengthened its position and is widely known. It has more monster-level masters than there are stars in the sky. And in this world, psionics either join them or die. After these words, the traitor put his hands on the two disciples and sucked their life force dry. He said with a smile that tomorrow's news would announce how Luan and his teacher had killed those two students. Luan became enraged. He activated Shadow Step and jumped at his enemy. The guy was ready to tear him to shreds, because he was the one who associated with that very dark side of the association. But suddenly he felt a sharp pain in his chest. The guy didn't reach his target and immediately fell to the ground. His head was spinning, his body was aching, and his legs were not obeying him. Luan realized that he had no more strength left. Lu Xin's ridicule grew more and more. He said that the guy had used his abilities for too long and had used up all his energy, and that he still lacked combat experience. The zombie students continued to attack the hero, but now he could no longer dodge them. Qin said that the winner is always right and no one will care what really happened. The hero and Xiao will soon be forgotten, branded as criminals, which is what history will always remember them as. And now he will become a hero who will be praised, after which Qin laughed very loudly like a true villain. He then ordered his disciples to kill the boy, at which point Luan became scared. The old man and Deputy Zhao watched the scene in silence. The man asked the girl if nothing would change this time either. And he also asked her to suppress the bad news about the security department as much as possible. The girl smiled and said that newly hatched chicks discard their unhatched brothers. Nature has always been cruel, but people never called it evil. Humans are also part of nature. He is no different from other creatures, and Darwin's law reigns on Earth. So a pessimistic view of the future will only drive him to the grave faster. The old man replied that people are not like that, and Hao appeared on the horizon, looking for his friend. Besides Hao, other comrades also came who were looking for Luan. Luan heard his friend's voice and responded to his call, shouting that he was here. Fu Guangkun ordered the students to listen carefully. All the people on the battlefield were under control and therefore they needed to be stunned, not killed. Zhao was surprised by what she saw, and the old man only smiled imperceptibly. There were not only students on the field, but also grown men who were desperate to make their children into human beings. Guankun asked his father to urgently call the people together. All these men were psionic slackers who owed him money. One call and everyone would be there, because his father was a member of the state committee. One of the menacing men approached Guangkun and reported that other comrades would soon arrive, and if everything was to the Lord's liking, then could he put in a good word for them with their father? The boy answered in the affirmative. At that moment, Hao gave the arrogant guy a kick in the ass and told him to go save people and stop showing off. The enraged guy said that he had only talked a little, but at that moment Hao suggested that they measure their strength. Whoever stunned more people would win, Guangkun agreed. Psionic children and fathers began to win the battle against the zombie students. At that moment, the traitor, who a couple of minutes ago had been rejoicing in his victory, realized that the situation had turned against him. Hao, who was holding one of the students, began to loudly call out to his friend Lin Luan. The red-haired hero responded, and his friend was glad that he was still alive. Luan asked why he'd returned, and Hao replied that he'd taken his father to safety and then thought about how to help his friend. Fortunately, Fu Guangkun quickly managed to gather a gang of psionics. The friend also asked what had gotten Luan so upset, but the guy said that the questions would come later, because their enemy wanted to escape. Meanwhile, Lu Qin couldn't think of anything better to do than just run away as fast as he could. Luan wanted to chase after him, but he still didn't have the strength. Suddenly, Hao said that he had a solution because he knew that his friend would be exhausted from fighting so much, and that's why he brought one thing. The guy took out of his pocket a strange little flask with 2 A's on the label. He said it was a miraculous A-level reagent that his family had been saving for many years. The boy couldn't believe that his friend would share such a remedy with him, but Hao said that Luan would thank his father later. After all, right now their main enemy is running away and they need to catch him to restore justice. Lukin was panicking. He didn't understand why these fools were appearing one after another and whether they really hoped to defeat the person from the association. He kept telling himself that he was the representative of the association while the enraged Luan followed him. Seeing this hellish aura and power, Lu Tin was frightened. He couldn't just lose like that. At that moment, disgusting worms began to crawl out of the traitor's body. But let's go back a little. Hao said that this is a reagent that his father carefully kept, and this is his father's gratitude for saving him. Luan immediately drank the miracle medicine. Suddenly, he felt a powerful surge of energy, and it seemed as if he was completely recharged. Luan asked his friend if they could handle it here themselves while he went and looked elsewhere. Hao replied that he could go and hit another zombie student. Luan's legs were electrified, his shadow tread ready. His hair was ashen again, and now it was time for justice. The one who thought he was invincible, because he was a representative of the association, was instantly cut in half. Lu Qin couldn't even use his worms because Luan cut him into small pieces. He screamed at the top of his voice and immediately a huge red Buddha foot appeared. Luan could summon the Buddha's projection again. Seeing the Red Knight, Hao was happy because he recognized the projection of his teacher, which meant he came to their aid. All the students and men finished dealing with the crowd and watched the powerful aura. Suddenly, Luan appeared in the distance and Hao called out to him, saying that they had dealt with everyone on their side. Luan turned to his friend and replied that he had also settled everything on his side. Hao was still under the impression. He asked the guy if he saw the projection of the teacher and where he was now. Luan replied that the teacher had just left. It was good that he had helped them settle this problem. Suddenly, our hero remembers that he forgot something. He forgot about Lala and Chinny. The red-haired hero told his friend that he had one unfinished business and ran away. Meanwhile, a frightened Chinny and Lala tried to escape from the huge monster. The worm had merged into one copy again, and now the heads of smaller worms were sticking out of its entire body. Chinny ran as fast as she could, and the poisonous fog pursued her faster and faster. Suddenly, someone called upon 3 cents of flame, and a small flame appeared in his hand. A bullet of fire flew past the fleeing Chinny. There was an explosion, and the cute heroine and her pet were thrown up by the shockwave, just like in a movie. But the landing was not so soft. Sister Qingni hit Chu Kui on the head and yelled at him for almost burning her sister. Shuyu calmed down and ordered her sister to get up immediately, otherwise the fog would cover them. Fire will only help temporarily because the worm has absorbed the reagents intended for the examinees, and they will not be able to defeat it. We need to take the students and Xiao away because the hallucinogenic fog is a very powerful thing. The heroes ran from the deadly smoke, and Chu Kui covered them, shooting his fiery fingers into the fog. Suddenly, someone next to them said that this was not the end. The heroes turned around to see who it was, but because of the fog, nothing could be seen. The unknown person ordered the evil worm to stop. Suddenly, the powerful evil creature obeyed and stopped attacking. At that moment, the heroes, frozen in place, realized that they had fallen into the fog. However, they were still conscious. Chu Kui asked his companion why the fog had no effect on them. A system table appeared before the unknown person, signaling that the capture was complete. The huge evil worm instantly turned into a small cute animal. A plump worm fell into the hand of the guy who said he left the glasses on him. Now this terrible beast has become Luan's pet. Zinni, seeing the red-haired handsome man, immediately ran towards him. Luan at full speed and hugged him tightly. She started kissing him and Luan tried to push her away because her sister was looking at them. Moreover, they first need to find the teacher that Shi Lily is looking after. A little later, they came to the girl and Luan asked her about the teacher's condition. The girl replied that he was still alive, but had lost a lot of blood and urgently needed the help of a specialist. Luan understood everything and replied that they would take him away because Hao and the others would come soon and they should not see Xiao in such a state. Chu Kui interrupted their conversation and said that the girl was also from the association and that she could not be trusted. She needed to be killed right now. Lily replied that the association was not only made up of the Red Army and Lu Qinya. Besides Xiao, there are a lot of people in it who want to change something and are working on it. The old man smiled imperceptibly when he heard his student. Shi Lily ordered the guys to take Xiao away because she considers them good people. After some time, Hao appeared in the clearing and asked his friend if he had managed to sort out his business. The guy also asked if he had seen the mentor. He couldn't be found anywhere. Luan replied that he was injured, and that was why he left. But he would be fine. There was no need to worry. A little earlier, the guy left Xiao with his new comrades. Chinny couldn't hold back her tears and began to sob very loudly. Luan tried to calm her down by saying that they would only be separated for a short time, and that until he could introduce her to Hao, it would be difficult for him to explain everything. The girl asked the guy what he was going to do in the association, and he replied that if the world is not perfect, then he will make every effort to fix it. He will follow the path of the teacher and do what he thinks is right. Remembering these words, Luan turned to his friend and said that they would be entering the Psionic University. The exam is over. News about the case of the hero from the slums, the beautiful Xiao, continues to attract the attention of observers. The association is concerned that the truth about the destruction of Chao City may surface, revealing its dark past. Moreover, the overwhelming majority of those present there were drugged, so they know nothing. The association decided to hide Xiao's existence, instead announcing that they had eliminated the criminals who wanted to kidnap the examinees and that the beautiful Pangguan had disappeared after being injured. Life was slowly returning to normal, and some woman was bragging about her son to the salesman. Luan's mother approached her, and the woman immediately noticed her friend. She laughed and asked if Luan had taken his exams because her son was in 15th place and he would definitely be able to get into university. After that, she looked at Luan's mother indifferently and asked how her son had done. Mom smiled sweetly and replied that her son had been accepted to the Psionic University. The woman first smirked, expecting that her son had not entered. And then, when Luan's mother's words reached her, she fell into shock. Later in the evening, in the hero's apartment, his mother called him to the table. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door. Mom was surprised that someone came to them so late. She opened the door and saw Chunggong and his assistant, who said that they had come to congratulate Luan on his admission. Seeing the swindler on the doorstep, the mother was surprised, but he replied that he was no longer a swindler, but her son's best friend. Then some strange guys appeared on the threshold with fish in their hands. Luanya's mother didn't recognize these people, but she was also amazed. Cindy appeared on the threshold with Lala, who introduced herself to her mother as Luanya's new girlfriend. This information shocked the mother even more. After the girl, the guy's friends appeared on the threshold and also came to congratulate him. The poor mother thought that the whole city would probably come here today. A little later, Hao asked Luan why he invited the villains here. The guy smiled and said that now they were all friends and they needed to forget past grievances. Meanwhile, a secret meeting was taking place in the association's tower. Zhao Chenlin sat at a wide table with an unknown man in the shadows. The man asked the girl if it was true that Xiao had defeated Lu Qinya gave up trying to kidnap the students. Chenlin remained unperturbed and replied that, as far as she knew, that was exactly how it happened. The stranger said he heard that one of the students stood out in particular. Chenlin smiled and replied that she hadn't noticed anything like that. A little later, our heroes headed to the entrance ceremony. A lot of people came. About 3,000 students from all 4 districts were here. Fu Guangkun snorted arrogantly, saying that the guys were acting like they were from the village, but unlike them, he had once given a report in front of hundreds of thousands of people without any worries. Suddenly, our heroes noticed that there were especially many people in one place. A big, muscular guy claimed that their western region was the strongest because it was full of athletes. Another guy in a business suit answered him that in his area there lived only dumb-headed muscle men, and they were no match for them. The best people lived in the south. Guangkun, in his usual manner, said that it was probably the local idiots who had caused the commotion. Luan noticed that there were a lot of people today, and this was a great chance to earn some points, but he needed to calculate everything. The guys on both sides of the barricades continued to argue fiercely about which region was cooler, the western or the southern one. Suddenly, Luan laughed very loudly and called everyone around him simpletons. The crowd fell silent, and all the bullies turned to see who this brave person had appeared. The crowd dispersed, and they saw Luan, who said that none of them were strong because they were all scum. After all, the strongest region is the eastern one, and they will tear them all to pieces. The blonde asked if this area was hypnotized, because of which the exam was never completed, and the association let them all through out of pity. The system reported multiple points received due to hostility, which certainly made Luan happy. Suddenly, Luan said that it was all because in their area there was an incomparable man who could defeat 100,000 people in a second. A handsome and macho man, Mr. Fu Guangkun. Poor Guangkun was covered in sweat because he realized the situation he was in, and the guys continued to jump around him and shout that he was their strongest master. But the guys from the west and south were not laughing. They decided to test in practice how strong this guy was. Luan didn't waste any time and quickly grabbed his friend by the collar to get away from there faster. Ran away. He was happy that he had earned a lot of money, but he did not notice the obstacle in his path. The guy hit him head-on and immediately fell down. He looked up to see who stood in his way. It was the Thunder Tiger Wang Man, who asked the boy who he was. Suddenly, the man remembered that he was the one who had crippled his stupid nephew. It seemed that Luan was about to get into trouble, but someone appeared behind the Thunder Tiger. The brute turned around to see who had called him. It was the old rector of the Psionics University who asked not to frighten his new students. The old man said that he was not interested in what was happening outside the university, but as long as the tiger was on his territory, he forbade threatening students. Surprisingly, the Thunder Tiger immediately cooled his ardor and fell silent. He then turned to Luan and said that it would be better if the guy didn't run into him on the street. The head teacher also arrived and told the tiger not to be angry, as he had been specially invited by the association to take part in the grand opening of the school year. Then the head teacher, in a more stern manner, ordered Luan and his friends to quickly change into their uniforms and go to the assembly hall. Our heroes did not argue and did as the head teacher said. Luan and Hao were surprised at how beautiful their uniforms were, but Guangkun still called them simpletons. In one of the rows, some unknown guys saw our heroes and everyone else noticed them too. Luan understood that they had noticed Guangkun. The guy said that the year had just begun, but everyone already knew about him, and everyone wanted to compete with him. The guys from the two districts whispered among themselves, asking if this was the guy who called himself the strongest. Guangkun couldn't stand it, and shouted at Luan that it was all because he called the eastern region the strongest, to which he replied that it was true, and he needed to relax. At that moment, the rector appeared on the stage and coughed quietly. Suddenly, the entire hall stopped making noise and silence fell in the large hall. Luan was surprised that the old man simply coughed and everyone became silent. The rector didn't even need a microphone to speak. The old man greeted all the students and said his name was Fan, and that he was the rector of this university. Fan continued. He understands that no one wants to listen to the old man's story, but nothing can be done, because speech is the only way to convey your thoughts. After these words, everyone in the hall laughed. This university was founded by an association, so when children join it, they technically become half members of the association, and from this moment on, their every word and action will be watched. But the old rector hopes that one day the students will be able to achieve more than the association. These words touched Luan. He heard something that was dear to him. The old man finished and went to his place, and the head teacher thanked him for his speech. And now he asked to greet one of the association's chairmen, Quan Ming, who prepared a speech for the students. The chairman smiled and greeted everyone sitting in the hall. He then said that his main interest was games. Hao did not immediately understand what the chairman said and asked his comrades what he said about his interests. Guangkun replied that he didn't know anything about what the chairman meant because the association's office was a mysterious place. Quan Ming continued by saying that the resources that contain supernatural power are very important to the association, which is why their extraction is constantly given top priority. The first good news is that they recently found a completely new vein, the scale of which is not inferior to the Liu Tao mountain range, and excavations will begin soon. All the students were surprised by this news, but Quan had a second piece of good news. The association decided to allow students to participate in the process. All this time, the rector looked at the chairman with contempt and remained silent. And the students were even more shocked by the fact that they would be able to participate in the extraction of resources for the association. Quan said that mining ore is a difficult task and they will encounter unknown animals and bad weather conditions, which is why they need security, but what seems like an opportunity could turn out to be the cause of the student's death. It's impossible to count how many 5-star psionics have risen in rank after participating in the mining. For example, Mr. Thunder Tiger is one of them. For any psionic, taking part in the development of ore deposits is a dream. Of course, this is very dangerous for students, so the association will select only 3 of the strongest students. The students stood up from their chairs after hearing this. They couldn't believe that only 3 would be taken. The chairman put his hand in his pocket and asked them not to be upset, because the selection would be carried out fairly. He took a golden shield-shaped badge out of his pocket and said that it was a qualification badge, and whoever got it would be able to participate in the development. 3 badges have already been placed on the selected students' uniforms. The students immediately began looking for badges in their pockets, but could not find anything. Quan added that the badges are not an indicator of the final result, since the result will be known in 3 days. Now it became clear what games the chairman likes to play. He wants them to compete with their classmates. The students weren't thrilled with these assignments, but everyone wanted to get involved in the development. Quan said that they would now name the 3 students who received the badges and called the vice principal to help him with this. The head teacher happily walked onto the stage and turned on the screen. There were 3 black signs on the screen and the chairman announced the first owner of the badge, Yahello, a third-year student on a full scholarship, is ranked 23rd on the university's list of top students. The second owner is Yan Gani, a third-year student, a member of the research team, and a weapons expert. There was discontent among the students because the badges were given to some monsters, and they won't be able to take them back from them. It's unfair. Quan immediately calmed the crowd by saying that the third owner of the first-year badge, Luan, was glad that the third guy would be among them. The chairman said the third owner was involved in the events of the attack by intruders during the exam, and he was brave and resourceful. He promptly called the psionics, who helped repel the attack of the villains. It was Fu Guangkun. Luan and Hao were shocked when they found out that the third owner of the badge was their friend. At this moment, Fu Guangkun realized what a dire situation he was in. The chairman smiled wickedly and said that he would look forward to the results in 3 days.